Chapter 319. Aso's definitely a lunatic. I agree. My companions agreed with my words, and behind us was indeed a rolling metal ball. What an old-fashioned trap. He's definitely an ancient artifact from the previous century. We ran as fast as we could while insulting each other. Finally, we found a corner in the wall where we hid and allowed the metal ball to pass. Why didn't we shatter it? Damn it, it was actually made out of adamantite. Not to mention shattering it, just being grazed by it would be the same as being hit by a train. What was a train? Alright then, to describe it in a magical fantasy world, it would be like being hit in the head by A+12 battering ram. Even if you were as lucky as a cockroach, you would only be left with cockroaches or cockroaches. He's definitely a pervert with a dark heart. That's why he would set up such damn traps. That mage would transform his own residence into a trap. I did my best to drag down the silly cat that was still biting on my head while being chased by the metal ball as I cursed him. Serves him right that nobody loves him. How is this a mage tower? This is obviously a pranking competition. When we first arrived, the first 3 floors were quite smooth. But the further we went, the stranger things became. Please decipher the formula written in Draconic within 20 seconds and obtain the correct number. If you exceed the time limit, the trap will be activated. It was nothing more than a 6-digit mathematical formula and password deciphering. Mages had high requirements for logical thinking and knowledge, so it was easy to understand. Moreover, we had the demon Professor Harlois with us. Such a high-level problem wouldn't be difficult for us. After you obtain the correct number, please sing it in the same tone as the climax of the 3rd act of the O Beautiful Sun opera. Repeat it 3 times. No more than 3 trills are allowed, and no more than 2 mistakes are allowed. Damn, Aso's an opera lover? Can you not be so ridiculous? 16. From a certain standpoint, the Mage Tower spirits were also clones of the mages. This voice that was filled with malice made it seem as if someone was waiting to watch a show, which made me feel quite displeased. 3429-420-4242, hurry up and sing. Didn't you obtain his inheritance? Harlois quickly dismissed the answer, but when she hurriedly urged me to sing, I could tell that her anxiousness was all fake. Her eyes were filled with delight, as if she was waiting to watch a good show. A magical inheritance isn't a musical inheritance, right? You expect me to sing opera? Screw you. How do you know my sister is a famous singer? We didn't even get to say a few words when the host tower spirit arrived. 1310. What about the middle count? Can you not be so deceitful? Before the silly cat and I could finish retorting at the same time, the malicious-filled tower spirit appeared again. Are you complaining about the middle count? At present, the shortest successful time is 5 minutes and 30 seconds. Even if I give you 2 minutes, you won't be able to sing it. Alright then, at the very least, the game's creator knew that this question would be far too difficult. Or, perhaps I should say that he had no intention of answering it at all. Before we could even finish our idle chatter, the only thing that poured down upon us after the mechanism was activated was an unbearable icy water. But what came after that was even more frightening. A ballet for 2 people? And we have to jump on a bamboo pole? Does tying a cat to a boot count? 3 shameful past events that can make one cry out of sympathy? Not to mention 3, I can even find 30. What? You want me to perform it in a small theater? Dream on. Go ahead and activate the mechanism. A cross-dressing competition? Only men are allowed to participate? Don't even think about it. Come, what's the mechanism this time? A tongue twister mixed with multiple languages? Let me do it. No matter if it's the ancient elven language, dragon language, or dwarf language, I have no problem with it. What? A tongue twister mixed with 32 different dialects? Chui hua serve the pickled cabbage? F*ck. As we walked down this path without any sense of shame, we resolved ourselves to destroy this tower spirit no matter what. By the way, is it really that difficult to enter a mage tower in a normal situation? No, in a normal situation, it's either an invader's annihilation mode, or a friend's visit mode. It's obvious that we've activated some strange mechanism. Everyone looked towards me as they seemed to recall the keyword that I had read out when we first entered. Oh, so that string of words is to activate the Mage Tower's inheritance test. Silly cat, don't bite me. Alright then, my act of pretending didn't work. Everyone looked at me with an expression that said, "It's all your fault." The silly cat was becoming more and more skilled at biting me. Well, this is a rare opportunity. Since there's a password, it would be great if we could obtain the complete tower. At first, I thought that it would only be a test on magic knowledge and techniques, or at most a test on one's personality. Since we had Harlois and I on our side, there shouldn't be much difficulty. However, nobody expected that the test would be so difficult. Since there was a possibility that we could obtain this tower, I didn't want to use the method of destroying everything in the tower, so I could only slowly play along. It's probably a test of adaptability. But since it's a successor test, it shouldn't be something so annoying. After the test of intelligence, there should be a test of strength. Before I even finished speaking, the door to the room in front of me opened up. 2 3-meter-tall metal golems appeared, buzzing and vibrating. Behind them, the fire elemental pool was also activated, and numerous fire elemental creatures walked out. Judging from my companions' passionate expressions, fine then, I decided to shut up. In order to test your concentration, please sing My Son as you fight. Otherwise, you'll be infinitely spawning fire elemental creatures. Are you done yet? I'm definitely going to tear you apart. Threatening the examiners and increasing the difficulty of the test. Also, I have a name. My previous master gave me the name Meteor. Judging from the 2 other doors that suddenly opened up and the fire elemental creatures behind them, it seemed that this Mage Tower Spirit Meteor wasn't satisfied with our answers. Mage Tower spirits were the result of mages' research on artificial souls. They were typically the mages' most trusted creatures in their own mage towers. They would act as caretakers, research assistants, and even support souls for casting large-scale magic spells. Some mages would even raise their mage tower spirits as their own children or disciples. The quality of a mage tower spirit would directly affect the mage tower's effectiveness. Judging from my past experience, the great majority of mage tower spirits were just like mechanical answering machines. They would only know a single command and a single action. The higher level a mage tower spirit was, the more human-like it would be. And if a mage tower spirit had its own will and personality, then it would definitely be a top-level mage tower spirit. This mage tower spirit named Meteor was obviously an extremely top-level mage tower spirit. It seemed that it had a rather lively personality. Fine, I should say that it was full of mischief. It actually started cheering us on as it watched us fight. You must reset it. Suddenly, I seemed to understand why it was becoming more and more difficult for us to advance. Since it was a top-level mage tower spirit with its own will and personality, if we kept cursing its biological father as we advanced, it would naturally want to kill us. It would seem that I've accidentally caused trouble again. I took a deep breath and casually pulled the silly cat off my head. I shook my right hand and a pitch-black magic sword appeared in my right hand. For the Lich King. I casually shouted the most appropriate battle cry. The pitch-black magic sword gave off a dim shadow, and the sword's blade seemed as transparent as thin ice. This magic sword had already been activated. Countless shadows appeared on the ground, transforming the entire room into a ghostly realm. Countless shadows took form on the walls, and even elemental creatures that didn't fear instinctively retreated. This wasn't any magic at all. It was merely the sound of a magic sword being unsheathed. This was the power of a top-level weapon. But why did this scene make me feel like I was the antagonist? Damn it, Harloise, you leveled up again? Could it be that you changed your job class to Frostmourne? What's Frostmourne? Isn't my alias Ice Calamity? Did you find another sword behind my back? The greatest tragedy in life was that no one would understand one's complaint. Not only that, Harloise sounded just like a heartbroken wife who discovered that her husband was having an affair after hearing her husband divulge his lover's name in his sleep. Just what was the meaning of Harloise's tone and words? After awakening to the consciousness of a pet cat, did Harloise really intend to awaken to the consciousness of a weapon? It's all because of you. Stop wasting time. I'm coming. If elemental creatures still had the ability to judge their opponent's strength, then these two gigantic metal magic statues would be pure killing machines. Their intelligence wasn't high, and they only had one command and one action. However, this represented their unstoppable will to fight until they were completely reduced to spare parts. Asterisk clang. Asterisk my magic sword viciously clashed with my iron fist. However, my expectation of being able to slice through metal like it was mud didn't happen. On the contrary, a tremendous force directly sent me flying, and a powerful rebound spread from my right hand to my entire body. I hurriedly took 2 steps back and stomped on the ground to barely stabilize myself. I almost ended up rolling on the ground like a gourd or a rookie's signature sword. How is this possible? My current strength isn't any weaker than a dragon's? Look at that arm. You're so damn rich. Beneath the surface of my magic sword was a dark gold color unique to adamantine. This was actually an unprecedented metal magic statue. This time, even Harloise wanted to call me a wastrel and a damn rich person. Magic statues were the mage's most commonly used personal guards. It wasn't difficult to create low-level magic statues. All one had to do was assemble some spare parts into a body, and then use magical power to activate it so that the low-level artificial soul within it could move. However, whether or not a magic statue would be difficult to deal with would depend on the materials of its spare parts. Flesh and blood magic statues were notoriously weak. However, the materials used to create them were easy to obtain, and they were one of the favorites of undead mages. They would be able to create a pile of flesh and blood magic statues. If they were weak individually, they could make up for it with numbers. If they wanted quality, they could even consider combining flesh and blood magic statues together to create a gigantic magic statue. Stone magic statues were slightly stronger, but clay magic statues had the advantage of not being afraid of physical damage. Sand magic statues were also the natural enemies of physical attack job classes like warriors. Stone magic statues and flesh and blood magic statues were cannon fodder that could be easily mass-produced. Metal magic statues were the main warriors. Since magic statues had bodies that could be activated, that was to say, the materials used were their flesh and blood. If the flesh and blood were strong and dense, then the magic statues would naturally have powerful bodies. Iron magic statues were the perfect warriors that were incredibly difficult to deal with. They had tremendous strength, quick reflexes, iron bones, and were immune to mind magic. Mages would often add some small tricks to their magic statues, such as lightning, fireballs, hidden weapons, oil sprays, poisonous mist, and so on. Even without those fatal traps, the bodies of metal magic statues would become even stronger and their power level would increase exponentially. Of course, the cost of creating metal magic statues would increase as well. Metal golems required blacksmiths to use the best materials to create their part. Enchanting the weakest magic-conducting metal could drain a top-level archmage dry, so it would take at least several months to polish. An ordinary metal golem would cost more than 10,000 gold coins, and high-level golems were not for sale. It was said that back in the immemorial Elven Empire, the Gold Elf royalty used to have mithril magic statues as their guards. Mithril magic statues were existences that were basically immune to magic. They were the natural enemies of mages, and they were also viewed as the symbol of rich people. But right now, the one before us was even more ridiculous. Even the gold elf princess wanted to call it rich people. Damn adamantite. That's an adamantite magic statue. He's really rich. Coating a weapon with adamantite would increase the price of that weapon by more than 100 times. But at the same time, its weight would increase by at least 3 times. Adamantite didn't have any special properties other than its hardness. Of course, in the eyes of most people, this adamantite's hardness was already at the level of being indestructible. Adamantite was incredibly expensive, so expensive that it was worth at least 100 times its weight in gold. When I thought about how the 2 magic statues before me were actually made out of adamantite, I couldn't help but sigh at the fact that the building's quality wasn't bad at all. I couldn't help but curse in my heart. Tui, how rich! If I sold these 2 magic statues, I'd be able to build an entire mage tower. But while I could sigh, the emotionless magic statues wouldn't stop. The higher the quality of the magic statue, the stronger it would be. This 3-meter-tall adamantite magic statue could only be considered a small one in the magic statue family, but its brute strength was capable of sending a dragon flying. Its small size also gave it high agility and speed. The magic runes on its feet even gave it the ability to increase its speed twice. Although its outer appearance was pitch black and inconspicuous, it was definitely the deadliest weapon of all. Avatar 1 and Avatar 2 were the previous Tower Master's proudest creations. If you don't defeat them, don't even think about obtaining our recognition. The Mage Tower Spirit Meteor would take advantage of this opportunity to strike me while I was down. But I was indeed in a bad situation as I was surrounded on both sides by these 2 magic statues. I once again regretted destroying my tower, or at least my future tower, because I was worried about the brat Adam. I didn't invite the gold metal meat shield to help me. Clang clang clang. 4 arms, 4 legs, and iron fists rained down upon me like a storm. I was beaten so badly that I could only crouch on the ground and defend. Large cracks had already appeared on the Ice Calamity magic sword that Harlois had transformed into, and the recoil from the sword's attacks caused my feet to sink into the ground. The magic statue's attacks were just that simple and violent. They were purely based on strength and speed. Their punches and kicks were like children fighting, lacking any beauty. However, the adamantite magic statue's punches and kicks made me feel like the entire world was shaking. I'm about to shatter. Use the Ice Calamity. The hibernation chill is taking too long to take effect. Indeed, it didn't matter if the enemy had high physical resistance or magic resistance, as long as they were a product of this world, they would be able to enter a state of absolute zero and be eternally frozen. No! Don't worry about keeping it a secret at a time like this. We need to use our trump cards when they're needed. Absolutely not. Why? If I'm frozen by the hibernation chill, I won't be able to unfreeze them. That means I won't be able to sell these 2 gold mountains for any money. You bastard who values money more than your life. If you want to die, go ahead. Don't drag me down with you. Chapter 320. Roland Miss. Strength 32, plus 10. Agility 22, Constitution 22, Intelligence 30, Will 21, Charm 19. Talent abilities. War Angel form, Sinful Demon form, Sword of Order, Titan body, Shadow feet, Divine Child, Barrier of Chaos. Basic job class. Level 60 Order Knight / Level 60 Chaos Witch King / Level 10 4 Elemental Swordcasters. Advanced job class. Level 4 Lord of Winter, self-created. System evaluation. An excellent meat shield capable of directly facing off against an immemorial dragon. A gold-ranked novice who can rival legend-ranked warriors. If you really want to find a dragon of time to prove me wrong, that's fine too. System notification. Congratulations, you have succeeded. The two before you are even more ferocious at melee combat than an immemorial dragon. But aren't you forgetting something? You're a mage. Compared to my time in the Northlands, my system interface hadn't changed much. My stats were still extremely average. The only difference was that I had taken a small step forward in my advanced job class. Aso's gift not only gave me a large amount of magical knowledge, but also gave me the buff of +1 in willpower and +1 in intelligence. Willpower didn't really matter anymore. After all, that was only important to Aso. I didn't need a higher willpower to strengthen my defense against mental magic. Intelligence was a mage's main stat, and it was also related to the accuracy and precision of magical research. This buff of +1 in intelligence allowed me to break through the threshold of 30 points in intelligence. This was a huge gain. This was also the first stat that I had ever reached level 30. However, perhaps there were still some conditions that I hadn't fulfilled yet, so the talent ability to break through in intelligence hadn't been bestowed upon me. Although I really wanted to complain, when I thought about how Harlow's frighteningly high 40 points in intelligence didn't awaken any powerful abilities, I felt that my 30 points in intelligence didn't have any qualitative changes, so I felt that it was quite fair. Harlow's was burdened by me, her magical pet's master. However, I couldn't explain myself. I knew what the reason was. I was a sly person who would run away from battles whenever I had the chance. I would do my best to avoid battles that were too difficult, dangerous, or meaningless. But sometimes it was better to be a bit foolish. The protagonists of hot-blooded legends were usually hot-blooded idiots. However, this wasn't some nonsense about idiots having dumb luck or being favored by the heavens. It was simply that single-celled organisms didn't fear challenges or failure. The more trouble they caused and the more battles they fought, the faster they would grow. As long as they stuck to their original intentions and accumulated plenty of combat experience, their growth rate would basically be the same as cheating. Fine then, I was talking about that brat Adam. Sometimes it was truly enviable to not think about anything at all. I could faintly sense that the next breakthrough would be incredibly important to me. I had also reached the basic requirements for breaking through, but I always felt like I was lacking something. Every bit of effort was equal to the reward. Even the best gemstones would need to be polished in order to shine. Perhaps my bloodline contained limitless power, but I also needed to be tempered to shine. From the moment that I left the underground, I had probably experienced a tough battle with Onderoken. I seemed to be having quite a good time, but a great battle was imminent. If I didn't push myself to the brink of death, how could the hidden potential in my body possibly grow explosively in the future? I also know that I need more actual combat in order to rapidly grow stronger. Fighting on the brink of death is the best training. But isn't it a bit foolish to constantly be on the brink of death for no reason? Perhaps it was just my personality. Even if I knew that this was an old problem of mine, I couldn't change it. I would always think too much. As a warrior, it wasn't necessarily a good thing to think too much. Sometimes I really envy Adam, Cavendish, and the others. They don't care about anything and only want to do whatever they want. Their growth rate is just like cheating. I've done all sorts of schemes to obtain all sorts of resources and support, but I'm only barely able to keep up with them. However, there was one thing that I shared with these two hot-blooded idiots. If I really had to fight, I would. Fighting is all about courage. I casually tossed aside the cracked calamity magic sword. In front of such an opponent, such a weak sword would be useless. Onderoken's wall of size. A huge myth-ranked shield covered my arm. The carving of Onderoken on the shield seemed to be roaring. This shield didn't have any amazing abilities, but it helped stabilize my trembling arm. Immovable mountain. The wielder's stamina is increased by 2. If the wielder also wears the semi-god equipment Earth Roar Bracers, as long as the wielder stands on the ground, the wielder will be able to transfer some of the damage to the ground and will never be knocked down. This seemed like a good ability, but it was actually just an ability to take hits. It didn't have the physical damage reduction that top-level defensive equipment should have. It would hurt as much as it hurt, and if a vital part of my body was hit, I would still die. This was doubtlessly a very useless ability. Even if I could use the set stats, I would still need the semi-god equipment Earth Roar bracers as a supplement. I couldn't even leave the ground, which was quite troublesome. But right now, this was the most suitable ability for me. Come, let's see who falls first. The War Angel form's greatest advantage was its ability to fly. In order to use the special abilities of these two pieces of equipment, I could only keep my feet on the ground. This is Sparta. I'll show you Roland's determination. F***ck, don't hit my face. I ignored the dark circles under my eyes caused by my initial mistake. I took a deep breath and observed my opponent's movements. I lowered my head, bent over, and took a step back to dodge that heavy punch. If I couldn't dodge it, I would use my shield to block it and take the opportunity to counterattack. Clang. The gigantic demon statue had no emotions. It didn't hesitate and it didn't waver. Every attack was as powerful as a mountain, and every attack was as accurate as a needle. Even if blood and flesh flew everywhere, it still didn't have any mercy or killing intent. It simply attacked and defended at its own pace, as if it was a secret machine that was completing its own work. Meanwhile, its opponent was a man made of flesh, but his performance was even more like an Iron Man than an Iron Man. Did I break my arm? I put on a layer of ice to numb the pain and continued. My right eye felt like it was blind, and my left eye was gone as well, but I still had sharp spatial perception. Did my internal organs receive heavy damage from the powerful recoil? I was fine. I spat out some blood and continued. Faster. This isn't difficult at all. It's just a simple mechanical movement. Think back to your past combat experience. How many opponents have you met who are more cunning and difficult to deal with? My eyes were already hazy, but the entire spatial layout appeared in my mind. The trajectory of that heavy punch was so obvious that I could sense it even if I closed my eyes. Faster. The limits of my physical body and stamina? It's still too early for me to reach that level compared to the desperate situations I faced in the past. Although I couldn't even stand steadily, my footsteps were perfectly fine. Since I couldn't move faster, then I would simplify and reorganize all of my movement. I would use the smallest movement to obtain the best effect. I would take a step forward, bend my body, and suddenly jump backwards. All I needed to do was dodge the punch. Faster. I'm not a coward who only knows how to take a beating. Gradually, I seemed to get used to my opponent's rhythm. I switched from total defense to total offense. I went from defense to offense. And now I had a balance between offense and defense. Now that I was starting to switch from offense to defense, the hibernation chill effect on my arm was finally starting to take effect, gradually tilting the scales in my favor. Hibernation chill. This effect is added to any ice element attack. Every attack will reduce the opponent's speed by 1%. This effect can be stacked. It's impossible to avoid. However, after stacking is stopped, the effect will automatically disappear after 10 minutes. As my attacks accumulated, the hibernation chill also slowed down the demon golem's speed. Faster. At the very least, I have to be faster than this iron lump. Yep, this was a battle of time and willpower. Would the demon golem stop moving first, or would I be beaten to death? Faster, even faster. Due to the loss of blood, I was now too weak. Even though I had already predicted my opponent's movements, even though his heavy punches were only moving at half speed, I no longer had the strength to move. Just as I expected that my head would explode like a walnut in the next instant, something unexpected suddenly occurred. Clang. The entire world seemed to pause for an instant. A certain bell suddenly rang, and then everything returned to normal. However, something was completely different. What I saw now was a completely different world. Congratulations for activating your natural talent ability. I didn't have the time to look at my system's notification or my inevitable venomous tongue. My iron fists were still as deadly as ever. I could only follow my instincts and fight. However, I discovered to my astonishment that my opponent's speed and punches were both much slower than before. It was as if I have a chance to win. Faster, faster. My final bit of stamina brought me victory. Finally, before I completely lost consciousness, my two demon golems were almost completely unable to move. They could only slowly move their gigantic bodies. The battles around me had already concluded. All the elemental creatures had been killed. This pitiful battle caused my companions to only focus on the physical body of the gladiator. They believed that he would win in the end, just like how he always did in the past. And the truth was just as I expected. Just like how he always did in the past, he did what he said he would. Ah! Stinky pervert, your dirty bodily fluids have entered my body. I'm being polluted. I'm so uncomfortable, so uncomfortable. I'm going to break. I'm going to break. Hurry and pull it out. Heloise's moans echoed in the empty room. Everyone looked at me with a strange gaze, as if I was doing something heinous and unforgivable. Don't intentionally misunderstand. I'm only using your clone as a band-aid to stop the bleeding. What bodily fluids? Don't make things up. I'm not making things up. Isn't blood a bodily fluid? It feels so strange to have someone else's blood flowing through your own body. Only you would tear off another person's body and use it as a bandage. You're going too far. You're such a demon. You'll be able to reproduce endlessly anyway. You're basically no different from the lowest level slimes. Perhaps you'll be able to develop some other uses apart from bandages, such as silly cat underwear. Don't bite me. I'm really going to die if you keep biting me. Harloise's mouth twitched in the end as she joked around with me. It seems that you've already obtained what you wanted. I couldn't help but tear up as I looked at the notification on my system that my hard work had finally paid off. Don't misunderstand, they weren't tears of happiness. They were tears of embarrassment from not knowing how to respond. Did I succeed in making a breakthrough while on the brink of death? I succeeded. The new racial talents on my system's interface indicated that I had indeed made a breakthrough, but why did I make a breakthrough in stamina and agility? I'm a mage. My 30 intelligence points should have been for a breakthrough in intelligence, right? Just now, you were a mage. I thought it was either a barbarian duel or a warrior monk's masochistic asceticism. When I thought about it, I instantly felt awkward. I indeed didn't seem like a mage at all. Even if I had obtained an opportunity to make a breakthrough, it might not have been an opportunity to become a mage. That was a perfect knight duel. You're the perfect example of a knight's spirit. That unyielding willpower. That impenetrable defense. Then, teacher, what's wrong with you? Cohen still didn't realize that he had dealt a powerful blow to his teacher as he watched me become more and more depressed. However, that wasn't the worst part. The battle had already ended. According to the Tower Master's design, we had already completed the trial. These two adamantine magic statues would be the final bosses. But what? You want him to be the new Tower Master? Dream on. Didn't you see what just happened? That guy isn't an intelligent mage at all. He's clearly just a short-haired monkey who hasn't even gotten to know his own limits yet. If I had to choose him, I might as well have chosen a gnome. At the very least, gnomes would know to run away when they see the adamantine magic statues. This was the Tower Spirit Meteor's synthesized voice, which was quite similar to the name of the other twin tower spirit of the three-colored tower, Garden. Alright then, I won't comment on how strange it sounded to have these two names together. But right now, one half of the three-colored tower's management authority was rejecting a new master. This was doubtlessly a super troublesome matter. Not only that, The demon of mischief's tower spirit meteor that we were familiar with was actually speaking up for me. No matter what, he completed the trial. According to the rules, he should become the new tower master. Although he didn't use his mage intelligence in battle, he was basically a Manchurian who only thought with his knees. He discovered that the adamantine magic statues didn't have any lightning resistance. They would slow down if they were struck by lightning. He also didn't discover that there was a magical rune on the back of the magic statue's waist that could control him. That's his weak spot. He also didn't discover any system notification that the fire elemental pool had an incantation to control the magic statues. Fine then, he was indeed unreliable. How about we try again? Chapter 321. One of the three-colored tower's special traits was that it had 2 elemental pools and 2 tower spirit. When fully activated, it could be viewed as 3 archmages. The tower spirit meteor was a combat-type tower spirit that directly controlled the fire elemental pool, spell boosters, magic colossus storage, and other combat facilities. Meteor's personality was designed to be flexible and cunning. He was a classic battle mage. The tower spirit garden was a support and research type of tower spirit. She was connected to the library, the water elemental pool, the laboratory, and other research facilities. In order to aid in research, she would remind mages of possible mistake. She had a large amount of magical, natural, and societal knowledge in her memory. Her personality was also quite cautious and conservative. She could even be called old-fashioned. Tower spirits that were absolutely loyal were mages' most trusted assistants. Naturally, the smarter the assistant, the better. There were several ancient tower spirits that had been passed down from ancient times that were even more intelligent than ordinary humans. Sometimes, overly free and intelligent tower spirits would cause trouble for their master, especially for their master's successor. Artificial souls weren't devoid of emotions. It was completely understandable that an artifact would trust their creator. Loyalty that was ingrained in one's bones could become personal worship. It would be difficult for outsiders to understand the deep relationship between a tower spirit and a mage. I definitely wasn't insinuating that Otaku and his only old friend, the computer, had a close and trusting relationship that a third party couldn't understand. I don't want a new master. I don't want my old master's treasures to fall into the hands of an outsider, even if this was the original master's request. That was why the most dangerous situation when exploring a tattered mage tower would be if the tower spirit was still functional. That would be basically the equivalent of dealing with an entire army under the control of a single commander. For the next successor of a mage tower, a tower spirit that wasn't very loyal would obviously be a huge problem. That was why the first thing they did after obtaining control over a mage tower was to reset the tower spirit's personality and memories. Although that would require them to start training the tower spirit all over again, it was still better than dropping the ball at a critical moment. And since the tower spirit had its own will, this was no different from wiping out the tower spirit's will. This naturally worsened the tension between the tower spirit and its successor. Perhaps the tower spirit wouldn't be able to directly rebel against the new master under the orders of the original master, but it would be unavoidable for them to do evil within the rules. Compared to Garden, who directly expressed her dissatisfaction, the seemingly kind meteor's method was actually quite similar. If a normal mage had been given such a torturous trial, they would have long since exploded in anger or directly fought against the trial. But, if someone actually dared to openly refuse the trial and fight against the trial, the mage tower spirits would have achieved their goal. They would be able to use the same method they used to deal with invaders to wipe us out. No matter who won in the end, the mage tower genie would no longer have a new master. Even if they managed to break through the mage tower's defenses, there would still be time for the mage tower's vital parts to self-destruct. Hence, if one wanted to obtain this Magus Tower in its entirety, the only way to deal with it was to play along with them and let them do whatever they wanted. Once they used up all the freedom within their authority, they would naturally pass this so-called test. If I make a powerful undead creature out of a dragon's remains, just how many types can I make? Also, how should I make the best use of the materials? What are the important things to take care of? These were Garden's additional questions for the Mage Tower Spirits test. However, they were filled with evil intentions. Indeed, this was a test of magical knowledge. However, an ordinary mage would definitely be unable to answer this question. After all, undead mages were still a minority in the Cloud Tower. And even if an undead mage specifically came to the Cloud Tower, that undead mage wouldn't be a top-level undead mage, nor would they be skilled in dealing with dragon corpses. And the people before me were all quite young and alive. It was unlikely that they would be highly skilled in undead magic. And since Aso was a hidden undead mage, it was perfectly reasonable for him to use undead magic to test his successor. Garden used her own method to choose the questions that she believed to be the least likely to be answered correctly. She probably saw me use holy light just now, so she probably thinks that I'm a divine arts mage who also studies holy light. However, it was evident that Garden's cleverness had made her own. If she really used some sort of specialized magical knowledge test, I might not be able to deal with it since I was the one who broke all the records for failing magic classes back in the day. Fine then, since Harloise was here, and with the level of knowledge she displayed in the previous test, it wouldn't be too much of a mistake for Garden to test me on the unpopular topic of undead magic. Could it be that I had unknowingly achieved the dream of every examinee, to bring a teacher with me to take the test? Cough, cough. Getting back to the main topic, even if it was an undead magic test, there was really no need for me to ask my teacher for help. If it's a dragon's corpse, the most common ones are bone dragons, corpse dragons, and dragon souls. These are indeed the best choices for making use of such a rare material, but they might not be the best choice. Since it's a matter of dealing with a dragon's corpse, then I obviously need to consider the material's characteristics. Now that I mention this, I started to miss the past. Back in the day, in order to obtain some dragon-grade materials, I had to go through the Dragon Graveyard and Dragon Valley. The feeling of being chased by the guardians of the Dragon Graveyard was truly nostalgic. If it's a white dragon, I'll unhesitatingly make it into a bone dragon. Not only is it because white dragons didn't have much intelligence when they were alive, I don't expect them to have much intelligence or spellcasting abilities. Ice-type corpses can also strengthen a bone dragon's ice dragon breath. But if it's a silver dragon, gold dragon, or black dragon of a certain age, and if the dragon soul is still relatively complete, then I can consider using soul-summoning magic to create dragon liches, dragon graveyard guardians, and other undead mages. Although the success rate isn't high, if it succeeds, then their combat strength will be off the charts. Please answer me in detail. What I want you to tell me is how many undead creatures and how many species can you create if I give you a single dragon? I was still intending to continue talking about the theoretical classification and choices of undead dragons, but my teacher seemed to realize that he had found a problem, so he changed the topic to a test of my application skills. If the corpse is complete, the entire dragon skeleton can be made into a bone dragon. If there's a dragon soul, it can be made into a ghost dragon. However, if the corpse isn't complete, the success rate will be very low. Part of the dragon's wings can be used to create a dragon skin gargoyle's outer shell. Dragon teeth can be ground off to create dragon tooth soldiers. Ribs number 7, 9, and 11, which won't affect the corpse's integrity, can be used to create a giant bone beast. The internal organs are excellent. Just the dragon heart alone is enough to create a top-level abomination. All sorts of dragon parts can be used to effectively increase the basic stats of zombies and stitched monsters. None of these can be wasted. As for rotting dragon blood, it's best to create undead slimes. Undead mages were so poor that their usage rate of materials was ridiculous. If I gave them a single dragon, they would be able to create a powerful army. Just how poor are you? Most of these things were created by you after you scrounged up all sorts of resources. I didn't teach you any of this back in the day. Harlow's comment seemed to have inadvertently revealed something. Judging from the Mage Tower spirit's silence, it seemed that my answer had far exceeded her expectations. It would seem that Aso and Harlois were both wealthy individuals who didn't need to scrounge up research materials and funds. How would they know how difficult it was to start from scratch? I hadn't even explained how to avoid the tomb guardians and dig up the tomb yet. Back in the day, my Grave Robbers Chronicles, Dragon Grave chapter, sold incredibly well. If the dragon eye isn't damaged, you can ask a demon warlock to help you create the highest level Abyss Watcher, the type that will forever be invisible. It's super practical, but it's quite painful to give them half of the dragon eye. That's why you can consider killing the other demon warlock. After all, 99% of demon warlocks are troublesome people who have committed countless crimes. Killing them will be the best way to help the common people. As for dragon scales, the heart, the back of the head, and other vital parts can be used to create dragon scale shield. They're light and sturdy, and won't affect spellcasting. They're basically the most popular type for battle mages. As for the other ordinary dragon scales, ask a leathersmith or alchemist to enchant them into protective gear. Dragon skin armor and so on are super popular, but don't ever tell anyone that they were dug up or the price will be lowered. Remember to paint them first. That way, the disgusting smell can be left behind so that customers can be sure that they're real dragon skin and dragon scales. Oh right. Green dragon nails contain poison, while blue dragon nails contain electricity. They can also be used to create enchanted daggers. In that case, you'll need to ask a blacksmith for help. I recommend a dwarf blacksmith in the 7th district of Cable City. Their craftsmanship is truly excellent. Their secret enchantment technique can create cursed black bone daggers, which are quite powerful. It's just that the owner of the shop is quite greedy. He's asking for 50,000 gold coins as an OEM fee. However, you can use your identity as an undead mage to threaten to kill his entire family. That way, you'll get a 40% discount. If you continue threatening to expose him for creating cursed items, he'll confiscate all of his asset. That way, he'll give you a 10% discount. By the way, even though I'm supposed to take care of that guy's business every time I pass by, why does he look at me like I'm his enemy? Alright then, I seem to have accidentally said too much. Everyone around me fell silent. Cher's expression towards me had changed from the respect I received from the previous battle to one that said, as expected of a super dangerous individual, I must be careful. Why did I know so much? She said it out loud. Could it be that there was a problem with my plan to raise a beautiful girl? My daughter had entered a rebellious phase where she disliked her middle-aged father so quickly? You're the one who doesn't. By the way, you're already middle-aged, so what am I? Old? Hello, Grandma. Goodbye, Grandma. Alright then, I was already used to having a silly cat hanging over my head and constantly dripping blood. I could just ignore her. What was I talking about just now? The greatest advantage of creating undead creatures is that you can try them over and over again. It's normal to fail. The materials are secondhand to begin with, so it doesn't matter if you reuse them. The only thing you need to pay attention to when creating dragon undead creatures is, I recalled my past experiences and came to a conclusion. As expected, that was the only thing I needed to pay attention to. Make sure you don't let the dragon see you. Otherwise, those narrow-minded lizards will come charging at you with their saliva, dragon breath. Tui, didn't I just dig up 7 dragon graves? Was it really necessary to hunt me down for 3 years? I'm doing this for the sake of creating new materials. I'm doing this for the sake of truth and knowledge. I'm the righteous one. Right after I finished speaking, the staircase leading to a higher level opened up. The tower spirits seemed to have come to an agreement as well. Perhaps you'll become an even more amazing undead mage than Master Aso. Not perhaps. It's certain. When I touched the control center of the mage tower, I felt as if my consciousness had entered the clouds. The entire structure of the mage tower appeared before me. This was a three-dimensional diagram of everything that I had just obtained. And then, cold sweat began dripping down my back. Salos crystal? How could such a thing exist? Salo wasn't some magical creature. Rather, he was an archmage from the immemorial generation. The word crystal was only an adjective. It wasn't some magical creature's core or secretion. It was a completely man-made object. Salo's man-made magic core wasn't fundamentally different from a titan's heart or an energy core. The only special characteristic about Salo's magic core was that it was much more powerful. Just how powerful was it? In a technological world, it would probably be enough to pay for a city's electricity for 3 or 4 years. At the very least, the creator of Salo's magic core had used it to power a floating city. That's right, a floating city, a large-scale city with several million residents, not a floating tower in the clouds. Salo's magic core was quite stable in my previous world, but would cause major trouble if something went wrong. If a Salo's crystal was activated in the wrong way, it would cause a familiar giant mushroom cloud to appear in the sky. Of course, it wasn't that the creator of Salo's crystal hadn't thought about using it to develop weapons. However, there had always been a small problem, a weapon that couldn't guarantee the user's survival, so nobody dared to use it to begin with. Activating a Salo's crystal required a legend-ranked archmage to inject a sufficient amount of mana into it through a special method. The explosion radius of the Salo's crystal far surpassed that of any teleportation spell. It was basically guaranteed that the user would die. Not to mention, Salo's crystal wasn't a necessity. After all, there were still forbidden spells in this world. However, if a Salo's crystal was developed into a weapon, it would have an advantage that forbidden spells couldn't compare to. It could be used as soon as it was activated. There wouldn't be a long casting time, and there wouldn't be any intense magical waves that would be announced to the entire world. If a Salo's crystal had been used as an energy source for a mage tower, I wouldn't have been so surprised. However, this Salo's crystal just happened to be found on a gnome cannon. That cannon was aimed at the Truth Symposium's Tower of 10,000 Mages, which was located 2 streets away. If the undead and the mage country started a war, and all the Truth Symposium mages were summoned for a ritual, and then a Salo's crystal suddenly exploded, I once again gained a new understanding of Aso. It was likely that he wasn't here just for personal reasons. He was most likely on guard against the mages from the very start. The gnome cannon wasn't the most important part. After all, as long as this Salo's crystal was detonated, the entire city would be within range of the explosion. However, the closer one was to the center of the explosion, the less time the mages would have to react, and the fewer archmages would be able to escape. And if Aso had left some sort of message for Blackeye, then a legend-ranked Lich would likely be able to kill more than 70% of all archmages in the mage country. No, considering that Liches could store their phylacteries far away, it was likely that they wouldn't even need to use them. Perhaps the current Blackeye was the backup detonator. I carefully put away the Salo's crystal and focused on the other 2 crystals in the control room. One was white and the other was red. Both were about half the height of a person, and I could faintly hear a human's voice echoing within. This was the true form of the Mage Tower spirit. The stronger the Mage Tower spirit, the larger the crystal, and the more memories and knowledge stored within it. I also had a Mage Tower spirit like this back in Sulphur Mountain City. However, it was only capable of controlling a library, so its abilities couldn't compare to these 2 Mage Tower spirit. Its core was also only the size of a palm, and it didn't seem very human-like. Right now, as long as I touched the control panel again, I would be able to reformat these 2 Mage Tower spirits into their original forms. However, I didn't intend to do so. Forget about what happened in the past. Just follow me from now on. Yes, the Mage Tower's Spirit Meteor Garden is willing to serve you. Really? Then let's start with a little song. I'll accompany you to watch a meteor shower land on Earth. Chapter 3:22. After the new master was confirmed, the three-colored tower's radiance expanded to the point where it could be seen from several streets nearby. The light cleansed the entire Mage Tower from top to bottom, including the stargazing platform, divination room, library, arcane garden, magic golem storage, mutated creature research lab, mystical creature dungeon, summoning room, elemental pool, servant area, and so on. As more and more rooms lit up on the map, my will reached every corner of the tower. Even though I was only touching the control center, my vision was able to jump between every floor of the Mage Tower. As long as I wanted to, my commands and voice could be transmitted to any location. The 17th floor of the main tower and the 12th floor of the two auxiliary towers have all been self-inspected. The 3rd floor of the main tower and the 7th floor of the 2nd auxiliary tower must be repaired. The other floors are in good condition. The energy pools have all been activated, and the magic golems will complete their self-inspection. They will begin cleaning and repairing the Mage Tower. It is estimated that after 3 days of comprehensive maintenance, more than 90% of the floors will be ready for daily use. The tower's spirit garden's voice echoed in my ears. Asa was indeed an old mage with a great background. It seemed that the dormant three-colored tower was in excellent condition. It would be ready to be used again after some cleaning. The magic golem warehouse was now open. Soon, those incredibly strong and tireless giants would walk out and become the best free porters and cleaners. At my command, the summoning room was already summoning mages who would listen to my commands. Those magical creatures from the other world were diligent and smart. They only needed to pay a certain amount of mana regularly, and they would be the best servants for the mages. If it weren't for the fact that they could only survive in the Mage Tower, where the mana was concentrated, the mages wouldn't even need other human servants. Master Roland, the library has been activated. Your pet cat is requesting to enter. Do you approve? No wonder she disappeared in the blink of an eye. She's never been so hard-working when she's working. Toss her into the water elemental pool. Let her enter after she cleans up and cleans up. The silly cat angrily rebuked me through our mental connection. Just as the steward garden finished her own self-inspection report, the head of security, Meteor, also finished his inspection. Due to years of disrepair and many other reasons, including the test we just went through, some defensive spells and magic traps have lost their effectiveness. The Mage Tower's defensive capabilities are only at 47% of its peak. I've already prepared a list of supplies. But, considering that the Cloud Tower was still relatively safe for the time being, I decided to put this list of zeros aside for now. Of course, the most important thing was that I had other plans for the Mage Tower. The three-colored tower's core twin tower spirit's support system is working well, and its mana reserves are excellent. Should I try? No, I'm a decent person, I won't ask you out. The consequences are too severe for me to bear. Although the three-colored tower spirit meteor seemed to be joking, I now had yet another ace up my sleeve, since I could still use the three-colored tower's core forbidden spell. Alright, this is for you. First, list out the funds and materials. If you have all the materials, start the transformation. The blueprint for the mobile cloud tower? Isn't it already lost? That's right, this was the Mage Tower design that I had chosen. The Cloud Tower type Mage Tower. This was also how the Mage City was named. However, the Archmage's Cloud Tower was only a city, while my Cloud Tower was a Mega Mage Tower that could travel through the clouds and solidify the surrounding water vapor into a tangible territory. I wouldn't be able to use a fixed cannon tower more than a few times in my lifetime, and it would be a waste to leave the battle-type three-colored tower in a safe city like this. I was destined to have endless troubles in the future, and a mobile mage tower was the best choice for me. I had already obtained the technology to create the cloud tower. Although the various materials were difficult to find, I would one day be able to collect them all. The biggest problem was a stable energy source. If I wanted the mage tower to float in the air for a long period of time, it would be impossible for it to be used on the battlefield. In that case, I would need to store up enough energy to fly for at least 2 months, which would naturally consume an astronomical amount of energy. This was originally the most difficult problem to solve. I had originally planned to find a group of 4 elemental swordcasters and other magic job classes to work for me as manpower batteries. However, this problem was solved far more easily than I had expected. Since the Salos crystal could even carry a floating city, a cloud tower wouldn't be a problem at all. Of course, just looking at the resources and funds required to construct the cloud tower made me feel dizzy. Not to mention, I wasn't intending to simply copy the cloud tower. Instead, I intended to learn the technology thoroughly and then modify it onto the 3-colored tower, while simultaneously retaining the advantages of both mage towers. Although this sounded like wishful thinking, since the cloud tower spirit didn't directly reject my proposal, it should be possible. Although it'll be quite difficult, it's not completely impossible. Yep. After a while, I'll help you all level up, and I'll also introduce a new friend, 007. With his addition, your knowledge will at least double. With the knowledge of 2 undead emperors, you will no longer be the 3-colored tower's twin tower spirits, but the 3 wise ones. The cloud tower needed to control the wind elemental energy in its surroundings, so a built-in wind elemental pool was necessary. In that case, a supporting tower spirit would also be necessary. If I didn't intend to remove the water elemental pool and fire elemental pool for simple modifications, then I would need to add a new tower spirit. It would be far too much of a waste to leave the cloud tower spirit in my hometown to rust. Forget about leaving my memories underground, but all the knowledge I'd obtained over the past 300 years of traveling around the world could be added to the cloud tower's knowledge reserves. Yep, although theoretically speaking, the cloud tower spirit would obey the new master's control, it was just like how a new general manager would often appear in a company with a new boss. It was completely understandable that a completely loyal subordinate would appear in the new boss. The 3 wise ones? That sounds excellent. That'll be our collective name from now on. From now on, not only did I finally have a proper cloud tower, the Great Industrial Party also had a proper research center. Previously, it would have been possible to borrow other mages' laboratories for ordinary magical research, or to rent other mages' shops for engineering and alchemy research. However, this would have been fine for ordinary mages, but for emblematic truths-level mages, it would be quite unsightly for them to do this for so long. They would basically be nothing more than a shell company filled with bad asset. They wouldn't even have a stable headquarters. Of course, reputation wasn't the most important issue. Just like how the various equipment in the cloud tower would help with scientific research, many magical research wouldn't be possible without the magical equipment and special rooms in the cloud tower. For example, the abnormal creature research room would be able to evolve 10 times faster than normal, and most of the mutations would be beneficial. It would be especially easy to breed new species. Not only would the summoning room's spatial structure be suitable for dimensional summoning, the walls would also be engraved with spatial, control, contract, and other magic arrays. This would make it easier for the summoner to control the summoned. Even if the summoner summoned a hell dragon, they could treat it like an inferno lizard. The most direct way to increase efficiency would be through the simplest of experiment. In the cloud tower, a simple command would be able to have the cloud tower spirit prepare a table for you, set up your experiment equipment, and place your experiment materials on the table. The cloud tower spirit would also record the process and results of the experiment. If you made a mistake, you could even use the cloud tower spirit's recorded memories to review the mistake. This would greatly reduce the research time, allowing mages to avoid wasting large amounts of time and energy on trivial matters, and speeding up the cycle of the next experiment. And Thorn Garden was developing new technologies and products every day. It was time to find a suitable laboratory for those overly energetic engineers and alchemists to build an explosive room, indestructible, to test the power of spells. This would be quite suitable for the energetic gnome engineers to use as a research room, explosion room. Thorn Garden wouldn't have to worry about being complained that it was too noisy or that it would be blown up into the sky one day. Of course, it was still doubtful whether or not this modification would succeed and how long it would take. It would also require a tremendous amount of magical materials that were priceless, so I could only take things slowly. But right now I had even more important things to do. How is it? What did the archmages say? The moment I left the three-colored tower, I sent the information about the Salos crystal to the archmages. I also sent the Cloud Tower spirits memories of Aso personally installing the destruction cannon. Of course, I also sent the Salos crystal as evidence. Cohen acted as my messenger, so he also brought the archmages' reactions and feedback. Some people immediately went berserk and wanted to fight the undead to the death. Most mages were quite calm, but when their own lives were in danger, nobody would be able to remain calm. Their calmness is actually quite strange. It's likely that they're just hiding their anger in their hearts. They're already furious at the undead. Chapter 323. It's already been 3 days and there's still no official reaction? It seems that things have gotten out of hand this time. The Mage Parliament's reaction was quite calm, to the point that it was rather abnormal. But if one thought about it, this was actually a sign of extreme anger. This was just like when two countries had a conflict. If the losing side made a statement of dissatisfaction, condemnation, or protest, that meant that the losing side didn't intend to take any actual actions to get back at the other side. It was just a show of face. If the Mage Parliament said that it was reserving the right to take further action, it meant that the Mage Parliament wanted to do something. But the most dangerous thing would be to not say anything. As long as it's necessary, the mages can endure humiliation. But right now there's no need for that. Then there were only two possibilities. Either the Mage Parliament couldn't afford to offend the Mage Parliament and decided to pretend that nothing had happened, or the Mage Parliament intended to take revenge, silently and viciously. Considering the current situation of the mages, it was 99% likely that it was the latter. The grudges between the two sides are already quite deep. The Mage country's forbidden spell ruined the undead emperor's plans to invade Ike, and the undead also schemed to kill the feared archmages in one fell swoop. Not to mention the still unconscious Amelia. There's also you. From a certain standpoint, you're the one who caused the situation to deteriorate to such an extent and forced Aso to his death. You're also currently in the Mage country. You're definitely the number one person they want to kill the most. Thank you for reminding me, you jinx. Right? How does the water elemental pool taste? Didn't you already taste it? The tea you drank this morning had my bathwater in it. Many pet lovers had probably experienced the awkwardness of having a pet show off its prey to them. What was even more awkward was that these pet lovers would share their prey with their master, such as secretly adding rats and cockroaches to their master's food. Alright then, this silly cat was doing this on purpose. I was going to teach her a good lesson so that she wouldn't feed me even more than usual in the future. Don't run. I'm going to hang you on top of the Mage Tower to dry you. As usual, the human and cat chased after each other. The next step of the plan was already underway. From a certain standpoint, mages were indeed the most extravagant of all. The top-level research facilities were only used to create basic spell models. The dimensional door to the water elemental plane was only used to summon a few water elemental servants. Most of the facilities were in use. My subordinates were delighted to be able to use the Mage Tower's top-level research facilities for their own research. I'm trying to equip the golem with power armor and external weapons, so that we can solve the flaw of the golem's single attack method. How stupid. Didn't you notice that the biggest weakness of the golems is their slow movement speed? I plan to install the iron horses driving wheels on them. This will greatly increase their mobility. In that case, why don't we install a something or? Flying golems are so cool, and they can even carry people as mounts. Coins. Stop bullshitting. That thing isn't reliable at all right now. There's no way to adjust its power at all. Either the lift is too high or it can't fly. If the lift is too low, it'll be fine, but if the lift is too high, it'll be a torture machine. The head of the golem will be lifted into the sky and the body will be left on the ground. Have you forgotten the unfortunate straw test subject? What does what or mean? There was another story behind this. Back when I was trying to develop flying engineering tools, I recalled the propeller planes from another world. But since I was once a liberal arts student, I was unable to explain the principles behind it. However, there was one small toy that I knew about, the bamboo dragonfly. I casually made a bamboo dragonfly toy out of a piece of wood, and then tossed it to the dwarves who were skilled in mechanical engineering so that they could discuss how to turn the principles into practical objects. Then, they asked me what it was. They obviously didn't understand what bamboo dragonfly was, so I casually said that it was something like a propeller. However, the dwarves didn't hear what I said, and instead took what or as the official name. And so, what or and what or spread far and wide. By the time I discovered that something was wrong, it had already become the official name of the golem, and it was impossible to change it even if I wanted to. It could be expected that after traditional golems were equipped with all sorts of accessories, they would be unafraid of death and capable of anything. They would also be equipped with all sorts of dangerous firearms and heavy armor. Just how terrifying would they become? For some reason, I suddenly recalled the muscular naked man who shouted, "I'll be back." Oftentimes, the intelligence of the natives of another world would be no less than that of an earthling from another dimension. All I could do was give them a suggestion and a possibility, and they would often give me a result that exceeded my expectations. Magical engineering was such a miraculous creation. When technology and magic met, the original technology would explosively undergo a qualitative change. Nobody could predict what would happen next, but it was foreseeable that it would definitely change this world that was dominated by magical civilizations. At the very least, under my control, the development of magical engineering was destined to surpass history. Beastman warriors in mobile armor, elven rangers on motorcycles, dwarves and gnomes who didn't have particularly strong bodies. History had already reached a certain turning point. How's the research on the Salos crystal going? It's probably a top-level creation from Halletdom's Hallettdom generation. Little Demi, do you have any clues? Little Demi said that it'll be quite difficult, but it's not completely impossible. But no matter what, the current environment is completely different from ancient times. It's impossible to find the original Salos crystal, but it's possible to find a smaller version with only a fraction of its power. That's good to hear. Tell him not to be in such a rush and to make it a medium priority. That Salos crystal is far too dangerous. I don't want to wake up one day to find myself in the sky along with my base. Little Demi was becoming more and more amazing. As my head engineer, he was basically a bottomless pit of engineering. He was always able to surprise me. During the past 2 days, I had proposed a new project, the development of a new type of colossus. The ancient civilization, Hallettdom, was also known as the Colossus civilization. Their Colossus technology was something to look forward to. I just didn't know how much of it little Demi would be able to use. As I had more and more subordinates under me, there were now specialists in all sorts of fields. It was no longer appropriate to have a loose employment relationship between a domain lord and a mage's personal consultant. Companies, departments, and project teams from another world were now proven to be excellent choices. By the way, I should mention that the current person in charge of my alchemy department was Ingo Br. However, the person in charge was actually the second-in-command alchemist Olivia, who was becoming more and more capable. Not only was she able to fully utilize her natural talents in history, but most importantly, she was able to understand and coordinate with the other engineers, blacksmiths, and enchanters. Although she wasn't even 20 yet, she was becoming more and more like a big sister in charge of a project team. Currently, the most important projects for me, such as improving my mobile armor and researching Olivia's magic box, were all given to her to handle. With her around, at least the alchemy and engineering teams under her wouldn't start fighting each other. Of course, she also complained about how creating Olivia's magic box and enchantment armor had given her a large amount of engineering and enchanting knowledge. She was now able to work as an enchanter and engineer, but she was getting further and further away from her dream of becoming a great alchemist. However, her alchemy teacher Ingo secretly told me that the effects of Olivia's alchemy potions were becoming stronger and stranger. For example, the long-haired underwear thief, who had been committing crimes in the Cloud Tower, was actually a wild monkey who had consumed a powerful hair growth potion. Olivia's potion had simultaneously activated heat, hair growth, height increase, berserk, intelligence increase, and many other effects, turning him into a long-haired gorilla who sexually harassed people everywhere. For the sake of world peace, I should have her place her talents in a safer place. I still want to live for a few more years. These were the exact words of Ingo, who had been constantly creating explosives. Since that troublemaker felt that his own disciple was a huge problem, his back and face were covered in cold sweat as he said this. It seemed that he had been tormented by his own genius disciple. Right, since her potions are so powerful, why don't we have her concoct a potion for Beifong? Perhaps that will make him more obedient. After all, he's already beyond saving. It's impossible for him to become any worse. Aren't you afraid that it'll have the opposite effect and that a Mega Beifong will appear? Perhaps he'll awaken to a new hobby, just like that experimental monkey. I thought back to that male long-haired gorilla who went around stealing old men's underwear. If Beifong also became like that, it was my turn to break out in cold sweat. Just thinking about it made me feel despair. Let's talk about it later. If that really happens, the end of the world might arrive earlier than expected. Suddenly, the gnome seemed to have thought of something frightening as he revealed a terrified expression filled with despair. Recently, Beifong has been treating Olivia to meals all the time. Perhaps he wants her to concoct a potion for him. That can't be. Does he think that he can still be saved? I don't know if he can be saved or not. Perhaps he wants to give the potion to his companion. Just as we were exchanging glances, we heard a cry for help outside the window. A monster. An ancient monster movie was currently playing out on the street. Refugees were screaming in fear as a gigantic black beast was currently fighting against a mage from the city guard. For some reason, this gigantic beast seemed rather familiar. I adjusted my view and discovered that it was a gorilla that was about as tall as a mage tower. This gorilla was currently happily playing with a doll in its hands. However, this doll seemed rather familiar. It actually had dragon horns and black scales. Is that Beifong? Isn't that the experimental monkey from before? He evolved again? Who's that? I don't recognize him. That's right, we don't recognize him. Cough. When I thought about the trouble that would follow, I decided to ignore the great beauty, who was struggling in Adamantium's hands. Let's get back to the main topic. Now that the great industrial party had a headquarters and research center, a large number of researchers, a storehouse to sell our products, and the approval of other mage organizations, the great industrial party could finally be considered to have fully matured. Tell the gnomes and dwarves not to travel too far on personal aircraft. There are gargoyles, griffins, and horned eagle knight. There are far too many powerful aerial forces in this world. Not only that, but they're also quite numerous and powerful. It'll be quite difficult to fight against them in a short period of time if we only rely on flying. It's better to focus on heavy aircrafts and cannons. That's right. All I could do was to use my status as someone who had experienced such things before to point them in the right direction so that they wouldn't have to invest a large amount of money into researching perpetual motion machines. Just 2 days ago, I had rejected the Perpetual Olivia's Magic Box project. It would seem that no matter which civilization's researchers came from, they all had great ambitions and motivation for this seemingly wonderful perpetual energy source. Of course, I won't forbid any private research. After all, nobody knows what the future will be like. But I definitely won't allow any projects with A or higher priority to be affected. There were far too many research projects that needed to be done at the same time. I personally evaluated the priority of these projects. Iron Horse was only AC, while the civilian projects were at most AB, while the Envy Borealis's airship fleet was an S, the highest priority. Yep, the second-generation Olivia's Magic Box and the modification of the mobile armor were also at S. Yep, it was quite obvious that the projects with the highest priority were those that would be able to quickly become effective in actual combat. After all, we didn't have much time left. It could be expected that since the seeds of change had already been sown and the Industrial Revolution was unstoppable, no matter what happened in the future, as long as the mage country didn't suffer a total annihilation, the Great Industrial Party would definitely become an important member of the Truth Symposium. Magical engineering would also become an important academic field. Of course, since it was unstoppable, there was no need to care about it. There was no need to think too much about the future. I should focus on the present. Passive racial talent, unyielding ferocious beast. All abilities will increase according to the severity of your injuries. Once you're heavily injured, you'll receive battlefield intuition, defense combined with offense, and other talent. You'll be able to increase your overall combat strength by 3 times. Strength and agility will be increased by 2 times. Stamina will be increased by 3 times. System notification: don't be a mage anymore. Go be a barbarian instead. This ability wasn't a result of a stat breakthrough, nor was it that rare. Many powerful species would have this type of racial talent that would increase their combat strength the more heavily injured they were. This was especially true for barbarians and beastmen. An injured beast would be far more dangerous. In fact, some berserkers would even choose to injure themselves before battle in order to increase their fighting spirit and power level. Although this was common, it didn't mean that it was useless. In fact, it was the most practical warrior talent. Anyone who used it would understand the joy of being able to counterattack in a desperate situation. However, those who were good at swimming would drown in water. If you relied too much on this talent, you would always be dancing on the edge of a cliff. You wouldn't even know how you died. You really did choose the wrong profession. Did you close your eyes and fill in your application? This was what Harloise had said to me when she learned that I had this talent. However, in a way, she wasn't wrong. After all, I was indeed a holy knight. In my second life, I had switched to magic in order to make up for my inadequacies, as well as to hide my true identity. However, the system's final blow to me was to directly open up a series of powerful melee job classes, including the Barbarian Berserker, Cross-Armored Knight, and Dragon Knight. Please prepare your own mount. Some of these job classes were truly attractive. If it wasn't for the fact that my bloodline required the power of order and chaos to be in balance, I would have really wanted to take on these job classes. In order to test out this new talent, I swept through the entire arena and unexpectedly discovered a few good candidates, which I recruited to be my subordinate. Of course, there was also a small accident. A barbarian mage? Me? Alright then, it was indeed rather shocking for me to defeat a heavily armored wild boar knight with my bare hand. However, after seeing my emblems of truth, he actually said that he wouldn't fight me unless I promised not to use magic. And so, I could only satisfy him. So, you crushed the enemy's iron helmet? Then, you threw his mount onto the arena? What a barbarian! Cough, that was just an accident. Now that the great industrial party and Thorn Garden were on the right track, the Truth Symposium's decision arrived. It was time for me to leave. Chapter 324. By the time I returned to the Forest of Dreams, I couldn't even recognize it. The moment I disembarked, I noticed that all sorts of flags were hanging from the dock. There were flags from the Ottoman Empire, Donlan Empire, Mage Country, and so on. There were even flags from the Bardi Empire itself. It would seem that the Bardi Empire had no intention of giving up on the Forest of Dreams even after taking such a huge detour. The docks were filled with busy people loading and unloading goods. However, the most eye-catching people were the adventurers from all over the world. Judging from their equipment, every team had at least one contract hero who wore the armlet. Actually, 4 adventurers who wanted to earn justice points. Compared to the harsh combat environment of the Ottoman Empire, the scale of the battles here was much smaller. There was also a safe zone that was absolutely safe, so this place was naturally much more popular. Although most of the adventurers were humans, there were many other species here as well. After all, adventurers had an obvious advantage over other species. Not only were there barbarians and beastmen from the Northlands, but even lizardmen from remote desert regions could be seen here. It would seem that this place is quite popular. After leaving the docks and heading deeper into the Forest of Dreams, the changes were even greater. There was a flourishing market area and a busy administrative district. The wood spirits in the forest and in the air all had their own shortcut. The shops here seemed to be doing quite well. There were busy people everywhere. This place was no longer a barren desert. When our Ivy League airship returned here, it caused quite a commotion. While most airships were small to mid-sized wooden airships that could only carry 30 to 50 people, the huge wooden airships that were at the level of a battleship gave everyone a strong sense of awe. The moment the large airship arrived, it immediately started doing business at the edge of the docks. Thorn Garden's branch in the Forest of Dreams is officially open for business. Don't miss out on this opportunity. The Ivy League airship was originally a huge airship to begin with, so it had plenty of space to transport goods. That was why I decided to modify it into a cargo ship that was also a traveling merchant ship. As for its main business, it was naturally Thorn Garden's various war machines. Now that the large airship was parked horizontally at the docks, all the automatic cabin doors opened to reveal various mobile shops. The wood spirits that had returned to their homeland were in high spirits as they started doing business. There were iron horses equipped with auxiliary wheels, simple mobile armors, engineering cannons, and all sorts of war machines. Of course, there were also some new weapons and equipment that were still being experimented on. Buzzing sawtooth swords, the latest dwarven firearms, portable dwarven cannons, and mechanical shields with their own defensive force fields were all waiting to be tested on the battlefield. Meanwhile, an excellent arms dealer would make the battlefield into a testing ground for their own weapons while earning large amounts of cash. They would then use the cash to expand their market and improve their product. The only difference between us and them was that we still had a bit of conscience and standpoint, and would only provide weapons to one side. Judging from the first day's sales, it would take some time before the adventurers could accept these mechanical products. After all, both gnomes and dwarves didn't have a good reputation in this area. And Jinya Biar, the demonstrator, blew himself up in front of everyone. I told you not to use the safety brand to name the rocket launcher. That name was completely cursed. Sure enough, these bastards aren't reliable at all. Forget it, forget it. Someone will definitely try it out. Let time and combat results prove it for us. There was another reason why we had returned so quickly to the Forest of Dreams. We had gone there as envoys of the wood spirits, and our alliance could be considered a success. However, when we returned, we had a new problem on our hands. The mage country sent Bardi as an envoy to negotiate a truce? How troublesome. I wasn't the one being asked to do this, but rather share. It seemed that someone had learned of our relationship, so there was obviously a problem with this assignment. Since they had sent her as an envoy, of course I couldn't possibly stay out of it. Leaving such a task to a gold-rank novice would be akin to tormenting her to death. It doesn't matter. I want to see what those fellows are up to anyways. However, I personally felt that they probably wouldn't directly ask me to do this. They were probably afraid that I would cause some sort of trouble or something. After all, compared to me, who was an outsider, Cher was more of a local talent. She would probably care about the mage country's benefit. I had already decided on my plan. I would reorganize myself in the Forest of Dreams for a few days before heading to the Bardi Empire's capital. As for whether or not I should check out Nitrain City, which was currently at war, that would depend on my own judgment. Yes, it was just me. The envoy went directly to the Bardi Empire's capital, but I didn't follow them. I only set a meeting point in the Bardi Empire's capital. Rather than being a diplomatic envoy that was being watched by others, I personally felt that it would be better to act alone in the shadows. At the very least, there were many things that couldn't be seen on the surface. If it was possible, I even wanted to take a look at the eastern battlefront. Perhaps I would even be able to meet some old acquaintances there. As I strolled by myself in the new town area of the Forest of Dreams, I was astonished by the bustling scene before me. Half a year ago, this place had been the Bardi Empire's Victoria Harbor. 2 months ago, this magical forest had been completely uninhabited, yet it had become such a bustling place in such a short period of time. Although there are many injured adventurers, the adventurers seem to be in good spirits. Most of them have smiles on their faces. Is that their hope for the future? It would seem that I don't need to worry about the Forest of Dreams. Or should I find a chance to take a look at the front lines? It was already noon. I casually ordered some dishes at a roadside restaurant as I watched a barbarian bragging about his adventures. Just as our adventuring team was in dire straits, I, as a great thief, took action. I started with a backstab, then knocked the Lich unconscious with a kick. After a series of combo attacks, I single-handedly killed the Lich. Frida. Wait a moment, this barbarian was actually a thief? As expected, as long as there were enough people, there would be all sorts of weirdos. But when I thought about the ogre thief I had met last time, I didn't think much of it. But a Lich could actually be knocked unconscious? If that Lich wasn't an undead mage wearing a skull mask, then it was probably a barbarian's additional racial talent of bragging. Brother Holy Knight, are you by yourself? A young female priestess approached me with a smile. Judging from the gold coin emblem on her chest, she was a mid-level priestess of the goddess of wealth. Of course, she didn't come here for any special services. Many priestesses of the goddess of love had personal hobbies. The goddess of wealth and her worshippers would forever only pursue wealth itself. I paused for a moment, but then came to a sudden realization. This was the front lines of the battlefield. Many temporary hunting teams would come here to search for adventurers. Places with high traffic like bars and restaurants would naturally be places where adventurers would search for companions. I was all by myself, so I seemed to be a lone adventurer waiting for a team. It would seem that the adventurers were lacking manpower, but the strange thing was, how did you know that I'm a holy knight? Since I had left the Cloud Tower, I wasn't wearing my signature mage robe. I was only wearing my usual linen robe, and I didn't bring any equipment with me. How could I have been recognized? My sitting posture, my smile, and the marks on my hands. A person who had received long-term military training and night training would have obvious differences in their walking and sitting postures. The marks on their hands were left behind by sword practice. As for their smiles, it seemed that the 59 business smiles had become a holy knight's trademark and instinct. The most important part is that you aren't dissatisfied with the cheap beer here. Even the barbarians in our hunting team complain every day that the beer tastes terrible. You don't even frown when you drink it, and you even smile. Your previous life must have been quite, indeed, a noble knight wouldn't even come to a low-level restaurant like this, let alone a cup of beer that cost 2 copper coins. Only a holy knight who was used to living a poor life would be used to cheap beer and black bread. I nodded. Judging a person's job class based on their appearance and habits wasn't a particularly profound skill. However, it was a required course for veteran adventurers. Only now did I seriously examine the priest before me. She appeared to be around 18 or 19 years old. Her short, linen-colored hair was neatly combed. She had some acne on her face, but it didn't affect her delicate and energetic face at all. She was wearing an old, half-body plate armor that still had some oil on it. It was evident that she had taken good care of herself. A small round shield and a spiked mace were a common combination for a priest. However, only the small round shield was enchanted. She didn't even have many pieces of magical equipment, so it was obvious that she wasn't rich. At most, she's a low silver rank. If she's the team leader, then the entire team's rating is probably at the peak of bronze. I lightly tapped my index finger on the table, causing a golden holy light to flash on the table. This proved her guess that I was indeed a holy knight. "Do you need something from me?" The female priest was delighted when she saw the flash of holy light. However, she then began to hesitate. Originally, she had thought that I was a holy knight who was traveling alone, didn't have any equipment and was so young, so she had thought that I was a newbie. However, I was able to control holy light so easily. If I was a holy knight who specialized in spiritual spells, then I was likely a high-level job class, gold. My team wouldn't be able to afford such a powerful character. Our team accepted a quest with a decent reward, but our defensive warrior doesn't want to do it anymore. That's why we're lacking a melee job class. I furrowed my eyebrows. This quest description was far too simple, and it seemed to lack sincerity. Ordinary mercenaries and adventurers would never accept a vague quest description. The more unknown things there were, the more likely accidents would occur. Perhaps there was something wrong with the employer. Life wasn't a game. It was impossible to start over again. Adventurers who lived on the edge of a knife's edge needed to be cautious. The female priest seemed to notice my dissatisfaction as she hurriedly added, "It's not that I don't want to explain in detail, but this is a major operation organized by the local fairies. We're only a part of it, so we'll only know the specific requirements when the time comes." After a slight hesitation, I nodded and accepted her request. "That's wonderful! Our wood spirits are so cute. Mercenary group finally has a meat shield. We can accept quests again." "What did you say? Can you say that again?" This time, it was the female priest's turn to be embarrassed. She lowered her head and explained in a small voice. "We temporarily formed a team here. We changed our names several times, but they were all the same names. I just randomly said one, and, in a way, I could understand. After all, the wood spirits were quite popular back in the mage country. Their female fan club would spend all their time in coffee shops, and it was impossible to chase them away even after work. The female priest and her older sister before me were probably wood spirit fans as well. Although it wasn't rare to have wood spirit fans, especially for females, there were all sorts of wood spirit fan clubs. Lolicon clubs for men? Those perverts will be shut down. But wouldn't they be afraid that they would laugh their heads off when they signed up with such a name? For some reason, I recalled the name Absolute Gentleman Alliance. This was yet another name that I would regret for eternity. As expected, I needed to be careful when naming names. Yep, I should be the one to do it. In that case, why did your original warrior leave your team? I vaguely guessed what was going on, so I casually asked. He felt that our name wasn't nice. As expected, in such a team, the males would have to endure even more pressure and strange looks. They would either treat others as perverts or effeminate. I was about to retreat, but when I saw the female priest's pitiful, tearful expression as she looked at me expectantly, I couldn't help but sigh. At any rate, I'm going to check out the situation here, and I won't be staying here for long. Let's just find a random team and make do with it. And so I nodded. It seemed that this was a good opportunity to get some exercise. All right, my lady. At least for the next few days, Holy Knight Roland is willing to serve you. That lake was just as beautiful and tranquil as before. Moonlight shone on the lake's surface, and it wasn't as noisy as the other parts of the Forest of Dreams. I walked over to the floating lotus bridge above the lake. On the floating bed in the middle of the lake, the Sleeping Beauty's voice and appearance were the same as before, except that her face was a bit more rosy. As I walked closer, her long eyelashes twitched as if she sensed my arrival. She had a sweet smile on her face, as if she was dreaming of something good, giving me some anticipation. Although you're much cuter when you don't talk, perhaps I'm still hoping that you'll wake up soon so that I won't be so annoyed. Unfortunately, I received no response to my words. In the end, Amelia helplessly returned to her peaceful state. Are the sacrifices still not enough? I seemed to be talking to myself, but I received the answer that I expected. Please don't be too worried. It's only a matter of time before Mother wakes up. The bright red Samantha walked out from behind a tree. Her calm expression seemed to contain a hint of worry. I nodded and didn't ask anything else. It was likely that these little fellows were far more worried about Amelia's deep sleep than I was. Just as I was about to leave, I suddenly recalled the little fellows that I had just met. By the way, are you planning any major operations recently? The kind where you're gathering many adventurers for a joint operation? Yes. I originally wanted to inform Father that the Forest of Dreams was expanding its territory. Chapter 325. As expected, it's completely untrustworthy to hire people on the streets. The next day, at dawn, I met up with the priest Betty and her companions at the restaurant from yesterday. However, as a veteran adventurer, I only needed to glance at them to discover that something was wrong with this party. It definitely wasn't just because of their names. No, it didn't take a veteran adventurer to notice that something was wrong with this party. No wonder they had sent the priest Betty to hire people. Everyone else was completely unreliable. Out of my 4 companions, the most familiar one was the barbarian I met at the restaurant yesterday, the thief. He was around 2.34 meters tall, and his wrists were thicker than my thighs. His leather armor was already torn apart by his muscles, and his face was so fierce that he could kill people with his face alone. His natural powerful racial talent, berserk transformation, and extraordinary strength allowed barbarians to easily change job classes into berserkers. However, this guy actually said something like this the moment I met him. Violence isn't good. That's why I haven't been a big brother for many years. The current me, Ajen, is a technical thief. Technical thief? You're telling me that a barbarian is a technical thief? Your war god will be angered to death by you. Of course, I know what a technical thief is. Those guys are thieves who specialize in exploring ruins, breaking traps, mechanisms, stealing, and other technique. Their most important stats aren't the usual thief's agility and strength, but rather the ability to break mechanisms, traps, and grasp the relevant knowledge and skills. This is a job that idiots can't take. Not to mention, because all of their time and energy is invested into mastering their skills, their combat strength is only 5, or at the very least, 0. But since this job class didn't require combat strength, it was exclusive to the gnome adventurers who were naturally lacking in strength and had dirty hands and feet. Their small physique allowed them to avoid traps that targeted normal people. Plus, they were nimble and had a natural intelligence bonus, making them the perfect technical thief. If I remembered correctly, barbarians' racial talent would increase strength, but their intelligence would decrease. Once they entered berserk transformation, their intelligence would directly drop to around 3, making them no different from wild beasts. It would be difficult for them to even complete a sentence. With Ah Jen's outstanding natural strength, if he had chosen an assassin job class that specialized in combat, I could only say that it would have been a rather unconventional choice. Yet, this guy actually chose a job class that required the most intelligence, a technical thief. I could only say that this guy was basically a scammer. Manners? I'm now a holy knight. It'll be far too damaging to my image to simply shout and complain. While trying to suppress the urge to complain in his heart, he squeezed out a smile and nodded. May the holy light bless you, friend. The huge body suddenly hugged me. Bean-sized tears rolled down his cheeks, wetting my back. You're the first one who didn't laugh at me. Barbarian brother, everyone has the right to choose their own path. Why would I laugh at you? You are Ah Jen's brother from today onwards. Those who mocked Ah Jen deserve to be sent flying by Ah Jen. Seeing that Ah Jen didn't send the newcomer flying, the surrounding companions didn't look happy. Instead, they looked disappointed. Clearly, they had planned to watch the show. What kind of people were they? The second person I introduced was the priestess I met yesterday. She seemed to be very normal. I'm Betty Oneless. You can call me Betty. I'm a guy. All right then, the most normal person instantly became the most abnormal. I'm a holy knight, I'm a holy knight, I'm a holy knight. The most important thing for a holy knight is, even if my head is broken, I can bleed, but my hairstyle, my smile can't be messed up. I kept chanting calming mantras in my mind, but my expression still froze for a moment. Then, I returned to my standard professional smile and extended my right arm. Mr. Betty, nice to meet you again. Wow. This guy can actually maintain his smile. Just like Betty said, he has an incredibly realistic fake smile on his face. It's said that a holy knight's strength is directly proportional to their fake smile ability. He can even maintain a smile after knowing that Betty's younger sister is a guy. Isn't that super amazing? I heard everything, you bastard. Veins were popping out on my forehead, but I kept chanting, I didn't hear anything in my mind as I continued to smile at this strange team. As for the little girl who had just been laughing at me, she was probably one of the few normal people in this team. She had a thick and short body, a simple appearance, a small flying hammer at her waist, a deep voice, and a long blonde ponytail that almost reached the ground. This was the Aladdin Mountain Range's specialty, the dwarven aunties, girls. Dwarves weren't rare in this world. There were grey dwarves underground, and there were mountain dwarves and shield dwarves in the mountain ranges. Although they weren't tall, they had plenty of energy, strength, and sturdy bodies, stamina. They were blacksmiths, warriors, miners, and the children of the earth. They were bold and straightforward, natural-born warriors. Of course, there were also advantages and disadvantages. Dwarves generally had short legs and slow reactions, so it would be impossible to count on them to jump around like elves. However, dwarven shield-bearers were world-famous for being excellent defenders. With such a dwarf present, this team wouldn't need to worry about a lack of meat shields. Hello, big brother Holy Knight. I'm Mary, Longbowman Mary. As she said that, this female dwarf directly pointed at the ironwood longbow on her back. Alright, should I say that it was only natural? As expected, this team didn't have any normal people. A dwarf actually became a professional elven longbowman? Her mountain bloodline was crying. Nice to meet you, Miss Mary. No, I'm Lady Mary. I'm already married, and I even have 2 children. My husband was too disappointing, so he stayed at home to take care of the children while I worked to earn money. Pfft, you really are a dwarf, Auntie. I didn't even know what to say when I saw this squarish face. There was a saying that the only difference between male dwarves and female dwarves was that male dwarves had sharper voices. Yep, that's right, it was male dwarves that had sharper voices. This was mainly because female dwarves spoke far too manly. Their voices were deep and magnetic, and the moment they left their mouths, they would astonish everyone and echo endlessly. Judging by appearance, female dwarves would also grow beards, while male dwarves loved to wear braids. It would be difficult for outsiders to tell the difference between male and female dwarves, as their sense of beauty was also quite strange. I just couldn't understand what was so attractive about a dwarf girl from my hometown with her charming buckets and bushy beards. Due to their different sense of beauty, it would be difficult for outsiders to tell the difference between male and female dwarves or their ages. However, dwarves who went adventuring would typically be young men in their 70s or 80s, which was why I thought she was a young girl. But since this Lady Mary said that she already had 2 children, and based on the dwarf's age of 120 as an adult, this Lady Mary was probably more than 200 years old. Alright then, I already had 3 strange teammates, and I was already numb to them. The last teammate was a delicate and pretty elf. His gaudy leather armor and the 3-stringed zither on his back indicated his identity. He was an incredibly handsome elven traveling bard. "Hello, I'm Solinar." Not bad, his etiquette was quite normal. His appearance was normal, his name was normal, and his job was also normal. However, my gentlemanly detective instincts were telling me that this Solinar before me was definitely no ordinary person. My cold back was also reminding me that I was in danger. As expected, Solo has taken a liking to him. Brother Solinar is great at everything except for his hobbies. All the warriors were scared away by him. But, if it wasn't for this, we wouldn't have become sisters with him. My sharp senses allowed me to hear their discussion. This time, my smile was finally shattered. Me. Are you gay? Please don't make it sound so bad. I just like handsome young men. As I said that, I secretly squeezed his hand, causing goosebumps to appear all over my body. F***ck. What kind of demon is this? Let go of me. Eat my broken shoe / Alright then, our first meeting ended up becoming a full-on brawl. I was panting heavily as I stomped on the gay Solinar. Should Kolos be in a church here? It would seem that I need a healing smile. For some reason, I felt like I would feel much better if I had that wild elf smile. Paha. You're disgusted by a gay Solinar, so you're going to find a trap to heal you? You're hopeless as well. The silly cat's taunts came as expected. However, I didn't even have the energy to argue with her. Just who were these people? It was likely that there was no adventurer team in the entire Forest of Dreams that was as strange as this. Was my luck really that bad? Silly cat, meow and act cute. Meow, master, I want to drink milk. I want it to be white, muddy, and smelly. Alright then, the silly cat instantly transformed into a young blonde cat girl. She had yellow cat ears, a tail, and a furry meatball glove. She intentionally said that in a sweet and flirtatious manner. As she said that, she even licked her lips and looked at me seductively, as if she was really thirsty. I instantly stood up. Yep, I got goosebumps all over. Go, I'll choose you, Harloise. Transform into a shooting star in the sky. I immediately forced her to transform into the silly cat. Then, I suddenly stomped on the ground and threw her like a javelin into the sky, transforming her into a shooting star. Stupid blockhead, you deserve to be molested for the rest of your life. Meow, I hate this feeling. I turned around while panting, only to discover that my companions were currently discussing this matter. He actually transformed his pet into a woman and had an ambiguous relationship with his pet? Is this the legendary sad something? Beifong. He's that legendary pervert. It would seem that any random adventurer would know who he was. Beifong had truly achieved his dream in life. He was famous. Relax, even if you're Beifong, I've already changed my name to an adjective. We won't look down on you. Everyone has the right to choose their own lover. Solinar nodded sincerely as he spoke words of understanding. Ah, I'm being pitted by a gay for my sexual orientation. At this moment, I was seriously considering returning to the Gui Ming River and starting all over again. To tell you the truth, we're all relieved. You're obviously more suitable for our team. Normal people won't last long in our team." Betty's words caused everyone to nod in agreement. However, I wanted to cry but had no tears. I'm clearly a normal person. The king of gentlemen, shut up! Since the introductions were over, according to the unspoken rules of adventurers, the next step was to find a simple quest to improve our teamwork. Actual combat would be more convincing than any words. The Wood Spirit's major operation was scheduled for 3 days later. This didn't affect the simple hunting quest. I casually accepted a quest called 100 Corpse Ghouls with Venomous Fangs from the Forest of Dreams. I then rode a black carriage that cost 2 silver coins per kilometer and left the Forest of Dreams. Corpse ghouls were undead-type undead that were slightly stronger than zombies. They looked like skinnier and uglier zombies. They didn't have much strength, but they were rather agile. Their teeth and claws contained poison. If one accidentally died to a corpse ghoul, there was a high chance that they would transform into another corpse ghoul. Corpse ghouls were all capable of using other corpses to strengthen themselves. The name corpse ghouls indicated part of their habit. These ghouls were highly aggressive, had a sharp nose, and were skilled at ambushes and ambushes. All 6 major undead planes were open to the public. These bloodthirsty creatures smelled the scent of the living, and many swarmed over. Corpse ghouls were quite common around the Forest of Dreams. Soon, we found a group of corpse ghouls on a hill. There seemed to be more than 10 of them, and the strongest seemed to be a corpse ghoul king. I had already asked around, and the members of this strange team were all quite strong. They were all at least silver rank. A normal corpse ghoul would be easily taken care of by a bronze warrior, and the corpse ghoul king was only at the top silver rank, so it shouldn't be too difficult. For the holy light. In order to act like a typical holy knight who hated the undead and redeem my image, I let out my habitual battle cry and was the first to charge. And then, I returned at an even faster speed. At that moment, I instantly understood why this team had been unable to find any meat shield. Solinar and Betty were both support members at the back. Basically, they were just there to watch the show. Mary, who was an archer, wouldn't be on the front lines either. According to the unspoken rules of adventurers, it was possible for technical thieves to not participate in battle. The end result was that I was the only one charging. Although the corpse ghoul's venomous fangs and claws were venomous, I had an epic-ranked shield, Omdaroken's Wall of Size, so of course I wouldn't be afraid. The ones who made me turn around and run were my teammates. "You must have been sent by the enemy to mess with me. Did you really not kill off your last teammate?" Mary's longbow was specially made from ironwood. This type of wood was native to the Hungduan mountain range, and was as hard as iron. A wooden sword made from ironwood could be used as a real sword. However, if it was made into a bow, it would be impossible for an ordinary person to pull it. However, Mary was a 100-year-old dwarf warrior. Her brute strength was in no way inferior to that of a professional warrior. Her bow, which should have been swift and nimble, transformed into a boom. Boom! 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 Not only did the arrow fly right past my face, it also felt like the Grim Reaper could descend upon me at any moment. If I had lowered my head just a little bit slower, I would probably be bald right now. Meanwhile, on the other side, the corpse ghoul king and our technical thief, Ajen, were engaged in a fierce battle. Technical thieves couldn't fight? Had you ever seen a technical thief who wielded a greatsword? Had you ever seen a technical thief who hacked a corpse ghoul king into pieces? Ajen even went berserk. Judging from his bulging muscles and the whites of his eyes, this was a high-level, complete berserk. This meant that not only did Ajen's strength increase exponentially, he also transformed into a killing machine that didn't feel any pain or reason. In just 2 attacks, only the upper body of the corpse ghoul king remained. Judging from how Ajen was still drooling as he stared at me, I was now his greatest threat. "Hurry and run, brother Roland," Ajen is afraid of blood. The moment he sees blood, he instinctively goes berserk and won't recognize anyone. Alright then, I finally understood why Ajen didn't choose his job class as a warrior. Complete berserk was his final trump card. Since he couldn't even control himself, wouldn't that mean that he would kill everyone on the battlefield? You professional scammers. You're scamming me. Chapter 326. Asalivus. In the undead language, it referred to Aso's eternal rest. And now, this was the name of a new city. Ever since a large number of undead descended from the 6 main planes, the 6 pillars of light, which were strategic locations of the Forest of Dreams, were under heavy protection. What sort of protection could possibly compare to an impregnable fortress city? And so, under the undead emperor's command, a new city was constructed. This city faced the Forest of Dreams from far away, yet strangely coexisted peacefully. The Forest of Dreams and Asalivus, Nitrain City, and the Frontlines Tombstone City. Apart from the small skirmishes by the adventurers, it could be said that the eastern battlefront was peaceful. But at the same time, the western battlefront was in a heated tug-of-war. Asalivus was the largest city in terms of dimensional teleportation, as well as the headquarters of the 6 major undead planes in the world of Achi. Although the undead emperors were still unable to descend upon Asalivus, the undead emperors didn't care about the costs involved. Thus, myth and saint-ranked undead lords were quite common. With the support of the dimensional doors, even ordinary semi-gods wouldn't be able to do anything to them. And the first city lord of Asalivus was Davi Soko, a demonic ghost lord from the desecration plane. Although demonic ghosts were the evolved version of corpse eaters, they still weren't considered high-level undead. Compared to their distant relatives, demonic ghosts' venom and stench were far deadlier. But due to their ugly appearance and bloodthirsty nature, demonic ghosts weren't well received even in the undead country. Davi had been able to become an undead lord despite being a low-level undead. Then, the undead emperors had entrusted him with the important task of Asalivus, which meant many things about Davi. Davi's slyness and intelligence made him famous right after he became a high-level undead. An undead that's most similar to Emperor Aso's slyness. This was the best description of Aso's personality. If any other undead emperor had been compared to a lowly low-level demonic ghost, that undead emperor would likely have been furious, and might even have directly destroyed the undead emperor out of anger. However, Aso only laughed out loud when he heard this, and he really did accept Aso as his disciple. Davy didn't disappoint his grateful colleagues. Under Aso's tutelage, Davy managed to progress step by step from high level to myth rank. And now, the undead emperors had entrusted Asalivus to him. Apart from their trust in his personal abilities, it was also because of Aso's friendship with Aso. Asalivus did an excellent job after he took office. He managed Asalivus quite well, and a total of 6 levels of the city had been constructed. The outer 3 levels were all made up of low-level undead, with mid-level undead scattered throughout. The high-level undead in the inner city were just as prosperous as the human capital. But no matter which area it was, there would always be a large number of soul-summoning towers. Ghouls, skeletons, and other low-level undead would be constantly awakened and summoned. The high-level undead would then lead these low-level undead to the front lines like herds of cattle, where they would then become cannon fodder for Nitrain City's front lines. Undead mages were also busily working and experimenting at the top of the soul-summoning towers. All sorts of mid-level and low-level undead materials were given to them. With the aura from the undead planes and the support from the soul-summoning towers, all sorts of specially modified and advanced undead soon left their laboratories. The undead now had the backbone of the middle-level undead army. Battles of attrition and fatigue were always the most suitable for the undead. It was common for an entire army of undead to have a single high-level undead, which would be more than enough to cause a tremendous amount of trouble for the defending human armies. Even worse was the fact that the undead constantly attacked day and night. Humans needed to rest, but the undead didn't. Although most of the undead were cannon fodder that didn't pose much of a threat, the high-level undead mixed in would always cause casualties. If the undead slacked off, it was likely that a truly fatal attack would immediately arrive. Even if the undead had already taken turns to rest, their fatigue would still accumulate, and their injuries wouldn't be able to recover in a short period of time. And once the undead were on the battlefield, no matter how many supplies and healing resources they had, they would all be used up in a short period of time. It was said that Nitrain City had already been forced to send out the Dragon Knights several times to wipe out the undead skeleton army. Unfortunately, it wasn't very effective. Even if the undead's dragon breath cleared out the battlefield, the undead would soon be filled in again. The undead were slow and sluggish, but there was no end to them. Perhaps the undead would be able to obtain victory after victory against them, but the undead would unknowingly lose all of their comrades. In the end, the undead would use up all their stamina and mana, causing them to collapse in a pile of corpses. This was how the undead had conquered so many cities over the countless years. The dead in battle would become new nourishment for the undead, making the undead calamity even more ferocious than before. The undead were quite patient. They continued to accumulate strength, as this was only the appetizer. Meanwhile, the hunters in the east began to attempt to stop and restrain the undead, heading to the front lines in order to reduce the pressure on Nitrain City's defenses. And so, battles had already broken out everywhere along the way. But right now, as the flames of war continued to burn, Asalivus welcomed two esteemed guests. Even the city lord Davi personally came to greet them. The two guests were two handsome youths. One was slightly older and had long hair, while the younger one wore a red headscarf. However, the similarity between the two of them was that they were so handsome that they didn't seem human at all. Their abnormally well-toned muscles seemed to glow with a golden light, and their dazzling golden hair shone like the sun. Their blue eyes seemed to have the Milky Way swirling in them, and they walked through the air as if they were standing on flat ground. They seemed like heroes from the legends. Esteemed Lord Hartley, Lord Eanes, it's fortunate that you've come to visit us with your mortal physiques. Otherwise, it would have been quite difficult for me to find chairs suitable for your physique. The old demon had a hunched back and was wearing a black cape. He held a walking stick, making him seem just like an old man who could collapse at any moment. However, he wasn't nervous in the slightest when facing these two gods. In fact, he even started to joke around. No need to be so polite. Since those false gods are capable of sending out incarnations to travel the mortal plane, how could we, who are stronger than them, possibly be trapped in mere stone statues? Little brats, we don't have much patience. Let's talk about working together. You filthy undead, just when do you intend to conquer the Bardi Empire's capital? Release our seals. Hunting in small teams was a rather nostalgic concept. In this boundless world, powerful individuals were far more powerful than ordinary soldiers. However, apart from an extremely small number of golden bloodlines and naturally powerful species, most powerful individuals had to take things one step at a time to reach their current level. Small teams would forever be the most basic and important unit in this world where individual heroism was the most prevalent. A small team's cooperation would directly affect an adventurer's evaluation. There were also job classes like thieves and bards that specialized in teamwork. Even mid-sized mercenary groups would have their members work together in small teams when carrying out missions. And if there was a high-difficulty mission that required a large team to carry out, experienced and reputable adventurers would gather multiple small teams to work together. Even if they could occasionally split up their teams based on their job classes due to special circumstances, it was impossible to count on them to listen to military orders. It would be fine if the battle was going well, but if the battle was going badly, it would be difficult to guarantee their loyalty. No matter how strong a soldier was, they wouldn't be qualified to be an adventurer if they couldn't be trusted. This was also why ordinary adventurer teams would forever only be able to do some supporting work during large-scale military operations. But sometimes, as long as they were used well, these mercenary teams that were skilled in small-scale battles would be able to make use of their individual strengths and become vanguard troops that far surpassed any regular army. And for this major operation, the Wood Spirits had hired a large number of small teams in addition to their own elite teams to carry out undead hunting missions. The Wood Spirits would be the hunters of the undead, as well as the bait to attract the undead's attention. If these small teams were ambushed or lost contact with the Wood Spirits, the Wood Spirits would know that the undead had come looking for them. The adventurers would then become the first line of defense. After all, if the Wood Spirits' plan was fully carried out, it was likely that all the undead would be alerted. At that time, it was likely that even the undead in Asalivus would come out in full force. And my small team was one of them. Our mission was to hunt the undead. Chapter 3:27. I'm such a fool, really. I already knew that random teams were unreliable. Random teams were basically all useless. For example, the archer was nearsighted, the priest was sleepwalking and AFK at the start of the battle, the warrior put all his points into intelligence and all his talent skills into haggling and diplomacy, and the mage forgot to bring her magic book and potion. As long as you couldn't imagine it, there would always be more useless. But this time, I just happened to be more convenient and casually accepted their invitation. Hunting the undead? Why do I feel like the undead are hunting us? I angrily roared as I ran. There was an entire large group of undead behind us. When did this start? When did we start being hunted down by the undead? Perhaps it was a gigantic barbarian who covered his face with a leafy tree branch in one hand and walked on his tiptoes while muttering, "You can't see me, you can't see me." Under the watchful eyes of the crowd, and under the gaze of the Blood Clan who had a keen sense of smell, who said, "Are you kidding me?" he snuck up and ambushed me. Perhaps it was that girl named Betty or that brat named Beatty. Even though the hunt had already ended, and even though a large number of Bone Knights were on their way here, they still insisted on knocking out all the undead necromancer's golden teeth before they were willing to leave. Perhaps it was that dwarf auntie who fired a super long-range cannon that accidentally hit the Cyclops in the mountain range? At any rate, our current situation was probably caused by these ridiculous teammates of mine. As expected, the worst thing about teammates was that they were useless. Useless teammates? Useless teammates? Have you forgotten who was the one who insisted on using local ingredients to make bone soup for everyone to drink? If it weren't for you wasting time, we would have escaped long ago, all right? Harlois seemed to have a different opinion. You don't understand. Bone spirits are even more rare and difficult to obtain. Using them to make soup can nourish one's skin and even increase one's mana. You sound so proud. It seems that your cooking skills are quite good. Of course. Back when we went on adventures together, I was always the chef. The most important thing when going on an adventure is to have a good chef. Otherwise, no matter if you're a semi-god or myth-ranked, you'll still have to starve when you need to. Even if you don't starve yourself, it'll still be quite disgusting. Look at me. After eating 2 seasoning buns, not only did the bone spirit's poison disappear, I didn't even have the fishy smell. Harlois, didn't you drink 2 bowls of it yourself? Indeed, it's very tasty. But why didn't you tell us first that it actually has a sleeping effect? You made us sleep until we were surrounded. Ha ha, didn't I forget? It can increase magic power, and the principle is to improve the concentration of meditation. Isn't meditation the same as falling asleep? Naturally, it has some sleeping effects. The silly cat kept glaring at me with a displeased expression. Fine then, I admit that I was slightly responsible for the troops chasing after me, but at the very least, I wasn't completely responsible. Nor was it the main responsibility. TSK, the way a man shirks his responsibility is really ugly. Looking back, there were no longer any low-level skeletons, zombies, or mummies that were slow. The only ones that could keep up with us were the mid-level and high-level skeletons, like the skeleton cavalry. I roughly estimated that there were about 40 to 50 of them. If we were stopped, there would be even more behind us. It definitely wasn't something that our small party could handle. Yep, at least not with our strength on the surface. I don't think I can deal with these guys if I don't use my full strength. If I use my full strength, won't I expose my true strength? No, why should I avoid exposing my true strength? Why should I escape? There's no need for me to escape at all. I suddenly thought it through. I only intended to observe the situation on the battlefield and the contract heroes' daily lives. At most, I would secretly help the wood spirits so that their plans and schemes would succeed. It wasn't like I intended to play a game of pretending to be a pig to eat a tiger. What was there to worry about exposing my true strength? And so, I unhesitatingly turned around. For the holy light, don't be impulsive. As expected of a holy knight who likes to act impulsively at critical moments, I was right to keep an eye on him. Before I could even draw my sword, the dwarf auntie and the trap priest grabbed me from both sides and started running. Hey, hey, hey! I'm going to kill them! Yep, we all know you're strong. I heard from my older sister, who's a holy light priest, that under the guidance of the holy light, a holy knight will never fear anything. Although she said this, Betty's eyes were filled with pity, as if she was looking at a crazy lunatic who was hopelessly fanatic. Cough, I heard from my old wine barrel that the holy knight has the syndrome of sacrificing himself to cover his retreat, but you should at least find a time when it's worth sacrificing yourself. Young man, don't be so suicidal. I'm already 136 years old. Let me tell you, this world isn't as bad as you think. The dwarf auntie was quite direct, but why did she sound like she was trying to persuade an idiot who was about to commit suicide? I really can kill them. I don't intend to sacrifice myself, and I'm not forcing myself. Yep, I believe you. What did they mean when they said I was just being perfunctory and sympathizing with me? I really could kill them. Aw, let go of me. I'm not crazy. Let me kill them. In the depths of the mountain range, a temporary mountain village had been established. Simple logs were piled together to form a protective wall, and the scattered tents were the campsite. However, if anyone underestimated the defenses of this temporary camp, then the wood spirits' special magical parasitic vines and trees on the walls would teach them a lesson. Originally, this was a key location for missions. Ordinary adventurer teams would only be allowed to enter when they lacked supplies or were injured. However, due to certain special reasons, there were far more adventurers here than expected. And after being busy for an entire day it should be said that after running for an entire day, the hungry and tired adventurers decided to go to the gathering point early to rest. Look, it's them. Damn it, we had to run for an entire 3 hours. You guys are lucky. The Shield of Glory just killed a high-level abomination and didn't even get the spoils of war to prove their victory. That was nearly 100 justice points. The wood spirits are so cute. Adventurer team was now famous. If you dragged a bunch of wild monsters across the entire battlefield and ended up snowballing, causing your companions to hate their parents for giving birth to you, you'd probably become famous as well. You'd be known as a burden to the adventurer team and a professional idiot teammate. Right now, no matter where we went, there would always be people pointing at us and saying, "What idiot teammate?" The other adventurers in the adventurer team were ridiculing us, but the adventurers in the adventurer team were incredibly calm. It was as if they were already used to it. It was no wonder that they couldn't find any other adventurers. Betty smeared some strange mucus on her face, as if she was doing some cosmetic work. Jen happily continued perfecting his own stealth equipment by adding new leaves and colors. To be honest, although many thieves would add colors to their equipment to match their stealth, Jen had added some leaves to 2 tree branches and now, He had even added 2 rotten cabbages and a carrot. This was even more eye-catching than doing nothing at all. Or, was he intending to sell vegetables to the undead? Could I pretend that I didn't know him? I really didn't know him. As for the dwarf girl, she was only a little over 100 years old. How could she be considered an auntie? If she was an auntie, then what was I, who was a little over 300 years old? Grandpa? Getting back to the main topic, this merry girl had inherited the dwarven tradition. After drinking 3 cups of wine, she was already dancing in high spirit. Of course, the dance of a dwarf auntie, from afar, it looked like a dancing barrel of wine. Judging from how these 3 dwarves treated everyone's mocking gazes as if they didn't exist, this wasn't the first time they had done this. This meant that they had made many people suffer in the past, so they were used to ignoring other people's condescension. The only normal person in the adventurer team, the handsome bard, was in high spirits as he turned today's events into a pub song, playing and singing. Of course, art originated from life, so it was completely understandable that the plot in the story would be different from reality. Making the main character look good was something every author needed to learn. However, it's understandable that he killed a group of skeletons and leveled up into a group of ghouls. Even though he was clearly just a corpse lich and was viewed as a semi-god mummy, it's still understandable that he was seeing things. But after being chased for an entire afternoon, he actually managed to stall an undead lord's army for 3 days and 3 nights. In a bitter battle, he even managed to kill off a myth-ranked lich who was leading the undead army. Not only that, he even managed to save the damsel in distress and the princess. Isn't this too ridiculous and shameless? Isn't this completely illogical? Brother Roland, you don't understand. In this day and age, it's all about fame. Serious storytelling has long since become outdated. If you didn't starve to death, you would have already changed your profession. The more illogical a story is, the more attention it will attract. The scarier the story, the more exciting it will be, and the more rewards the listeners will receive. Even if everyone knows that it's all nonsense, it's fine as long as they're having fun. Who would take it seriously? This is the market. Alright then, I was speechless at being taught how to cater to the market by a native from another world. I shook my head as I watched these scammers continue to make more and more of a fuss. I went back to my own business. There was a gigantic ancient tree in the center of the campsite. Although it wasn't as tall as the Forest of Dreams sky tree that reached the clouds, it was still several hundred years old. Yet, 2 days ago, this tree had been completely empty. There were treants and wood spirits guarding this area. It wasn't that there weren't any adventurers trying to find out what was going on. It was that all ordinary adventurers who tried to approach this place would be stopped. A kind-hearted adventurer called out to me when he saw me walking over. "Don't go over there. Those wood spirits won't let anyone pass at all." Before he even finished speaking, I had already walked past the blockade. However, the wood spirits and guards ignored me as if they hadn't seen me at all. Right after that, the muscular adventurer who had just spoken ran over to try. However, before he could even get close, a wall of thorns suddenly rose up and the wood spirit's vigilant and hostile gazes caused him to shrink back. He could only smile apologetically and return to his original location. The adventurer who witnessed this scene remembered the appearance of the young man who had just entered and hurriedly asked which team he was from. After all, only that person had been allowed to enter, and he was the leader of the adventurers in this expedition. Yet, this unfamiliar young man had received the same treatment. Even if he didn't have anything special about him, it was likely that he had a special relationship with the wood spirit. In that case, it would be necessary to investigate him. Of course, I didn't know any of this since I had already entered the treehouse. What surprised me the most was that I met a human here. He had shoulder-length blonde hair, blue eyes, and fair skin. His black armor flashed with a dark golden adamantite. His black gloves were even carved with powerful magic runes. The magical waves from his jeweled longsword were so strong that I could feel it even outside the door. I didn't know if this handsome man was strong or not, but he was definitely rich. Not a single piece of equipment on his body was below epic rank. Of course, I recognized him. He was the leader of the mega mercenary group Westwood Guardians, the Black Guardian Kai's Eloan. He was also the leader of the adventurers participating in this expedition. Of course, this was only in name. However, I immediately disliked him because I think that we should punish the team with that strange name that caused all this chaos. Otherwise, if everyone imitates him and doesn't listen to orders, I'm afraid that the entire organization will be in chaos. In the hall, the three virtues were present, but only Samantha was in charge. Facing Keith's righteous opinion, she coldly shook her head, but when she saw that I had arrived, she took the initiative to turn her head and squeezed out a smile. "You've arrived." "Yep. How's the seed? Is it going well?" "It's already beginning to sprout. It'll complete its nurturing period in 2 days. After that, it can be activated at any time to enter the next stage." Kai's had an astonished expression. He was also astonished to see another human in this core region. However, I didn't intend to talk to him. I approached the core region of the main hall. The tree's heart was trembling slightly as if it was a living creature's heart. Underneath it, a tremendous amount of life energy was accumulating. The moment it exploded, it would be as unstoppable as a volcano eruption. The seed of the Forest of Dreams was also the hope of the wood spirits. When this seed sprouted, the sky-covering sky tree would be uprooted from the ground, and the new Forest of Dreams would gradually grow. Amelia, who was in a deep slumber, would also have a new domain. Although the seed needed support from its mother, the roots of the Forest of Dreams had already arrived here 10 days ago. This sky-covering tree was actually only a part of the root. Once the disguise was torn off, the new Forest of Dreams would swiftly take shape, and Amelia would become even stronger. She would also obtain new nutrients and new territory. This was obviously not what the undead wanted to see. In order for Amelia's dimensional will to descend, the seed needed to germinate to a certain degree. This would require time. The spreading wildfire in the grasslands could only be extinguished at the very beginning. The undead weren't blind. When the dimensional will expanded its domain, the entire natural laws of the world would be affected. This would make the dimensional will at its weakest period a target for its enemies. It was obvious that as long as the seed was allowed to germinate, the undead would definitely take action. At that time, there would definitely be a fierce battle to be fought. And since there would be a battle sooner or later, it would naturally be best to fight before more high-level undead arrived. The wood spirit's judgment was correct. I also hoped that the Forest of Dreams domain would expand, so that Amelia would wake up sooner. Since Samantha said that the seed was fine, I nodded and didn't ask any more questions. It would be better to leave this to the experts. "You are?" Kais asked his own question. He felt that the person before him was quite familiar, but he couldn't remember where he had seen her before. "Who am I? You don't even recognize the person you're punishing?" Chapter 328. As long as there was money to be made, there would be gnomes. The goddess of wealth's merchant guild. Fine, there wasn't much of a difference between the two. Either way, as long as there was money to be made, they would be almost everywhere. The goddess of wealth, Baana, was a goddess who focused on wealth and business. However, the biggest difference between her and other churches was that all her priests would be merchants as well. In fact, many of them were even merchants who changed careers. The goddess of wealth loved successful merchants who could make money. She especially appreciated new business models and markets, and viewed them as important criteria for obtaining her divine favor. Any successful business would be an extension and explanation of her teachings. Not only would selling holy water, healing potions, and other such common services be ignored, but every goddess of wealth's priest's bag would be a department store. Everything could be found there. In fact, even the goddess of wealth had created spatial divine arts specifically for storing and trading items. However, unlike the gnomes who always caused trouble, the goddess of wealth's priests were incredibly popular everywhere. After all, they weren't here purely to earn wealth for themselves. Instead, they were here to create more wealth. There was nothing more worthy of the goddess of wealth's favor than a new business route or source of wealth. The best goddess of wealth's priests didn't care about how much money they had. Was it a little difficult to understand? There was once a classic example of this. The Icewind Valley was so poor that it was frozen for at least 300 days a year. There were only incredibly powerful ice magic beasts there, and it was impossible for any crops to survive. However, there was an incredibly delicious ice lake fish there. However, nobody would travel for half a year in the middle of the ice and snow just to eat a fish. However, one goddess of wealth's priest actually discovered that the bones of these long-tailed fish were translucent, just like crystals. Not only that, the locals had the custom of processing fish bones into handicraft. These handicrafts were made from bone combs, which had a unique style. It was said that using these combs to comb one's hair for a long time would even be beneficial to one's hair and neck. As a result, through a series of marketing campaigns, such as inviting famous city lords to wear these handicrafts from the border of Ike to attend important banquets, and increasing the price at auctions, the locals forcefully turned these bone combs, which weren't even worth a single coin in the local area, into a rare and priceless item in the center of Ike. Every year, merchant caravans would travel thousands of miles to obtain bone products from the goddess of wealth. The local area also gained a new source of income, and a new trade route was born. The originally ordinary priest was also favored by the goddess of wealth. He was now Archbishop Finn of the Olis parish, the largest parish of the goddess of wealth. Perhaps the priests of the goddess of wealth didn't have much money to begin with, but they never lacked for it. On the other hand, the more business and money were used, the more perfect the goddess of wealth's divine concept would be, and the more powerful she would become. To be honest, Baiana was also famous for her hatred of war. To her, a stable business and trade was the best. All of Baiana's priests would do their best to extinguish the fuse of war. And once war broke out, the divine concepts of pestilence, violence, slaughter, and so on would rise. The gods' priests would then go around causing trouble everywhere. If war broke out, literature, music, and other civil, divine concepts would definitely be affected as well. In fact, divine power might even become a hindrance. However, no matter if it was the gods themselves or their believers, they would all lack the ability to take action. From a certain standpoint, Baiana could be counted as one of the core members of the anti-war faction. During that god's declaration, the goddess of wealth, who was a staunch supporter of the death god faction and had always been an anti-war faction, actually declared war first, causing many to be astonished. But now that things had developed to this point, the goddess of wealth was actually the one who benefited the most. Business divine concepts included the concept of money, which was a currency that was guaranteed by the government's reputation. Only with money that could be exchanged for anywhere would there be concepts like finance, futures, stock market, and so on. Only then would the goddess of wealth be able to further strengthen the concept of wealth. In other words, if there was a true god in the earth dimension where money worship was rampant and all sorts of economic forms were developed, the goddess of wealth would probably already be at the level of a high god. But here, business and trade remained at the most basic level, and she was still only a second-rate god with medium divine power. A common currency was quite important to the goddess of wealth. This was something that would only be possible when business reached a certain level of development. It would be quite difficult to develop in this world, since there was no such thing as an undying dynasty. In the Achi continent, which was filled with independent kingdoms, precious metals were the most reliable hard currency. However, carrying money wasn't a necessity. Some people had thought about using paper money and tried before, but nobody really dared to use it. Even if some kingdoms tried to forcefully use paper money, it would either be used in an extremely small area, or the kingdom's credit would go bankrupt, leading to a pitiful end. But ever since that declaration, a new common currency that was purely based on credit appeared in this world: justice points. Although it didn't seem like much had changed, it was actually the beginning of credit currency. That was because without a true God's guarantee, this currency would definitely be worthless. This was a classic example of virtual currency. The natural laws of the world changed because of this. Baena, who had mastered the art of justice point exchange, even created several unique divine arts that allowed her high-level priests to act as wartime shops that provided all sorts of items for exchange. This miracle helped her obtain even more faith, gratitude, and fame. What followed was a steady increase in her divine power. In fact, just creating the concept of justice point exchange gave the concept of wealth a new meaning, allowing it to successfully improve. Of course, providing such a service would be the equivalent of a priest directly communicating with the god. This would be impossible without sufficient divine favor and holy power. Basically, only high-level priests would be able to do this. The moment I returned to our campsite, I discovered that there was already a long line outside our tent. At the very front of the line, Betty was carrying out her divine concepts requirements by providing adventurers with a justice point exchange service. Silver light gathered in her eyes. Her usual smile had transformed into an emotionless, cold, and dull expression. Beside her was a pitch-black dimensional space that constantly distorted light like a black hole. He simply listened to Betty's request and erased the justice point record in her armband. Then, he took out the completed item from the black hole and handed it to Betty. His speed was quite fast, and he made no mistakes whatsoever. Seeing this, I knew that my worries had been unnecessary. Just Betty alone was an essential strategic factor for this operation. As long as she was here, we wouldn't need to worry about our adventurers being ostracized at all. And so, I directly turned around and left our temporary campsite by myself. From a certain standpoint, this was a bad habit of mine. Even if there were professional scouts around, I would still investigate the situation myself. While it was true that I didn't trust others, it was precisely this bad habit of mine that would cause others to criticize me. However, this bad habit of mine had saved my life several times in the past. But before I even left the campsite, I met someone who seemed rather familiar. His name seemed— what was his name again? I'm Kais Alorn. It would seem that Kais was quite well-mannered. His smile didn't change even after I called him the wrong name. Do you need something from me? If you have the time, I'd like to have a chat with you. It was quite obvious that Kais wanted to find out more about me, but I was too lazy to feign civility with him. I don't have the time. I'm just about to go out and investigate. Perfect, I was planning to do the same. Why don't we go together? Black Hurricane, come out. As he said this, he activated the enchantment on his glove. Black smoke suddenly rose up, and a completely black steed walked out. This steed was at least a head taller than ordinary warhorses, and its red eyes had a bloodthirsty glint to them. When the light shone on its body, it seemed to distort in a strange manner. A nightmare warhorse? This was a rare item. This type of warhorse had the bloodline of a nightmare beast. Its endurance and speed far surpassed ordinary warhorses, and it even had some supernatural abilities. When it galloped at high speed, its distorted light could create illusions that would cause arrows to miss. Its bloodthirsty nature made it unafraid of any opponent, and the most convenient part was its nightmare beast bloodline. It could also be summoned at any time as a contracted beast, which was quite convenient. Yes, during our previous adventure in Terrasil, our team coincidentally obtained it. It's really beautiful, isn't it? Kais smiled at me as he gently stroked the horse's head and intimately touched its neck. For some reason, this scene reminded me of a certain beast tamer that had been intentionally forgotten but would probably jump out on his own soon. At the very least, if he was here, I wouldn't have to personally investigate. But when I saw Kai's summon his mount, I had to re-evaluate his power level. For a knight job class, more than half of a person's strength depended on their mount. This was a good horse. Although it didn't have any powerful special abilities, it was still an extremely useful ability to distort arrows. It could increase the user's combat strength by at least 30%, and the fact that it was able to obtain such a priceless mount in the market proved how powerful this magic knight was. I found it rather amusing. Kai's was actually showing off his abilities in front of me, as if he intended to use his power to suppress me, but at the same time, he didn't make me feel too disgusted. Alright, if you can keep up, then keep up. Irene Bela. But the strange thing was that my waving hand landed on empty air. There was no response to my summon. Pfft. Not far away, the magic knight couldn't help but snicker, which made me feel rather awkward. However, I was also rather confused. Although Irene Bela had been sleeping in my frigid winter earth recently, accumulating power in preparation for her evolution, it shouldn't have been impossible for her to not hear my summons. Humph, you haven't let me go out to play recently. Did you forget about me? Alright then, I had been wandering around the city recently, so there hadn't been many opportunities for her to go out. No wonder she was complaining. I'm sorry, I'll remember to take you out for regular walks in the future. For some reason, I recalled that Bao had been acting like this when she was throwing a tantrum when I hadn't gone on walks for a while. How insincere. Weren't you forcing me to use my trump card? Did you think that I didn't know what you wanted? Strawberry ice, banana ice, 10 people's worth, 1 month, and I'll make sure you eat your fill. From a certain standpoint, ever since the frigid maw invented fruit-flavored shaved ice, they had developed new hobbies. Apart from the taste of fruit-flavored shaved ice, what they truly liked was the dyeing effect of fruit juice after it entered their bodies. Their poop yellow ice dragons and green tortoises were truly a test of one's endurance. The most unacceptable part was that they would even change their appearance in order to match their color. For example, they would have a yellow X that was even taller than a house. Fine then, just thinking about it made me feel uncomfortable, so I shouldn't think too deeply about it. Alright, deal. Hurry up and come out. Look at that brat who's secretly laughing over there. I've almost lost all my face. Right after I said that, I floated into the sky. However, I wasn't on my saddle, but rather being held in a gigantic claw. Above my head was a gigantic creature that covered the clouds. It was a crystalline ice dragon. Although it had a similar appearance to a bone dragon, it was purer and more powerful. Ice dragon transformation? Irene Bela, you've broken through? No, I've just recovered. Your world is basically the ice elemental plane. I can feel the comfort of home there. Home? Ice elemental plane? I faintly understood something, but now wasn't the time to think too deeply about it. That was because I would have to think about how to deal with the magic knight who was gaping at me in astonishment. Chapter 329. Looking for trouble with the undead? Many people would choose to find a holy knight or a holy priest. They viewed the undead as their natural enemy, and many of their abilities and divine spells were specifically targeted at the undead. There were also specialized undead detection divine spells. No undead can escape the judgment of the holy light. All along, paladins had been confident in facing the undead. But, if I had to say, the Holy Knight's undead detection ability was a bit exaggerated. Its principle was to release a small amount of holy light and use the holy light's natural resistance to the power of death to detect the surrounding undead. First of all, due to the limited amount of holy light, its detection range wasn't too large. Even a high-level holy knight would only be able to detect a few kilometers, while a low-level holy knight would only be able to detect a house's area. If the holy light was in an open area, it was highly likely that the Holy Light would be able to detect the Holy Light in front of the Holy Light's detection range. And the worst part was that the Holy Light's fundamental principle was that if the Holy Light discovered the Holy Light would most likely discover the Holy Light as well. At the very least, the ancient artifacts and demons that I knew of over 300 years old were all capable of detecting Holy Light job class members based on the density of Holy Light in the air. Casually using undead detection divine arts in a place where undead gathered would basically be suicidal. Rangers and thieves, the best scouts in ordinary squads, would be no good. It would be difficult for rangers to use divine arts that could track living beings. The undead's perception of living beings would allow them to ignore low-level stealth technique. Undead mages' various anti-detection divine arts would always be a pain in the ass for thieves. Many undead would even use their souls, liches, to sense their enemies. Low-level stealth techniques that relied on light and shadows would be completely ineffective. Alright then, now that I mentioned it, we all understood just how ridiculous Ah Jen was. He was actually able to fool a blood tribe noble just because he could use his stealth, which didn't even count as a disguise. In that case, what profession was the most suitable for searching for the undead? First of all, he had to have enough methods to detect the undead. Secondly, he couldn't be killed by the undead. At the very least, he had to have the ability to escape. Alright then, the final conclusion was out. The most suitable job to cause trouble for the undead. Necromancers. Pah! With a snap of his fingers and the simplest of actions, necromancy, the group of ghouls that looked like hunting dogs had changed their boss, and their original master had turned into a pile of broken bones. He eliminated the necromancer who was hurting low-level undead. The group of ghouls lost the shackles of their former master, and became a bunch of wild dogs that would bite anyone they saw. As long as they were branded with my soul imprint, they would naturally become my puppet. I closed my eyes and ignored the aura of death in my mind. Compared to the Holy Knight's ability to detect the undead, an undead mage's innate ability to sense the power of death was the most effective method of detection. Without this, how would an undead mage be able to find the undead and corpses? There's another squad about 1.3 kilometers ahead. The leader seems to be a black knight. I casually shook the black cloak off the unlucky Lich's body before draping it over my own body. It seems that there are quite a lot of prey. I guess I'll be very busy today. A murky aura of death rose from my body. While I covered my face, I constantly adjusted the strength of the aura of death until my entire body appeared and disappeared in the black mist. At this moment, to the Holy Knight and the undead mage's undead sense, I was just a lich who had just become a high-level undead. As for why I wasn't a lich, I was here to hunt, not to become prey. If even the weakest lich here was a legend rank lich, then the wood spirits would definitely send out a hunting squad to wipe him out. And even among the powerful undead lords, every single lich would be a famous individual. It was highly likely that anyone who tried to impersonate a lich would be exposed. Rex's skull would have been exposed long ago. Alright then, by now, they had probably already guessed what I intended to do. My old job of organizing the undead calamity. Oh my, another group of little Black Knight, where do you think you're going? Since I was already here, how could it be enough to just scout around? The undead that filled the sky were all free troop. Since a great battle was imminent, how could I not take in the combat strength that was delivered to my doorstep? Perhaps I could even use these undead as a cover to gather some information. Although it wasn't rare for the undead to fight amongst themselves in the undead plane, the intelligent undead wouldn't fight amongst themselves now that the undead lords were keeping them in check. However, battles between low-level undead wouldn't attract much attention, but it would be far too conspicuous if there was a target that was obviously trying to destroy and reorganize the other undead. Remember, when you hear my order, meet up with me. That was why I didn't completely reorganize the other undead after I attacked them. Instead, I only left a high-level undead with a soul imprint on them so that they could wander around the area and listen to my orders when necessary. Of course, if there were any modified undead or powerful troops in my team, I would of course accept them without hesitation and exchange some low-level undead for them. This was just like a wooden ship that was constantly changing parts. In the end, perhaps the outer appearance wouldn't change that much, but it was likely that all the parts would have been changed. As for whether or not it would still be the original ship, I wouldn't bother with such a philosophical question. At the very least, my undead soldiers were rapidly becoming stronger as they changed. Our prey this time is going to be rather troublesome. The skeleton swordsman who was currently being surrounded had a faint green glow on his bone blade, which seemed to contain some poison. His skeleton's outer shell was also a dim yellow color, as if it had been strengthened by the earth element. It was obvious that he was a high-level undead, but judging from how he hadn't shown any obvious emotions since the start of the battle, he wasn't an intelligent undead at all. My subordinate's ghouls were far too low-level, so he easily sliced them apart with a single swing of his sword. He then took large strides towards me, and behind him, a skeleton mage who was also wearing a black cape was currently casting a buff spell on him. A skeleton mage who specializes in transforming the undead? His bones have been strengthened by the earth element, and his bone blade has been enchanted with poison. At the very least, he's been strengthened twice. That's pretty good. Although killing the main body of an undead mage is obviously the most important thing to do in a battle, but the skeleton mage was already right in front of me. His eye sockets were filled with burning soulfire, and I could even smell his foul stench. However, I only shook my head and took a step forward. You'd be too foolish to come after me. Charge. With a simple dash, I arrived right under the skeleton mage. I unsheathed my sword and stabbed directly into the skeleton mage's ribs, piercing through the skeleton's spine. After stabbing in, I twisted my sword, causing the skeleton to crack and fall apart. Nobody understood skeletons' weaknesses better than an undead mage. High-level skeleton warriors like these had no sense of pain. If you shattered their skull, they would just turn around and stab you as if nothing had happened. If you cut off their right hand, they would stab you with their left hand. However, the weakest part of these bones that had been pieced together would always be their joint. As long as their spine was broken, they wouldn't even be able to stand up. What happened next was even simpler. The skeleton mage was extremely smart. Seeing that his greatest trump card couldn't even withstand a single attack from me, not only did he quickly tell me his mission, he even signed the strictest soul contract with me. And so, I took control of that skeleton warrior, repaired it, and added it to my personal guard. Then, I tossed a few of the most heavily injured ghouls to the bitter-faced skeleton mage before I left. This was only a microcosm of what I was currently doing. While the sun was still setting, the dozen or so patrol squads and undead transport squads around the Wendy's mountain range where the camp was located had all become my subordinate. At the very least, with these subordinates present, my eyes could now cover the entire mountain range. Then, something strange happened. Strange, why don't I feel any discomfort? Undead mages had to pay a price to control the undead. In order to make a bloodthirsty low-level undead obey the mage's control, the undead mage would need to leave a soul imprint on the undead. The finer the control, the more complete the soul imprint, and the more spiritual power the mage would need to invest. In order to tame a powerful undead's instinctive resistance, both mana and spiritual power would need to be invested for a long period of time. My current mana level was the same as a knight's, which was gold. I was basically at the level of a high-level undead. If I used this method to control high-level undead, I would only be able to control 2 at most before my energy would be exhausted. That was why I always signed a soul contract with them. If I died, they would die. If I wanted them to die, they would die. This was the type where I would have them work for me. Most undead armies were organized in such a way. they would establish control over every single undead in their army. Even an undead emperor would be drained dry. That was why it was necessary to have a large number of mid-level and high-level commanders. The high-level and mid-level commanders would establish a superior and subordinate relationship or sign a soul contract, while the mid-level commanders would directly control the undead. This was only the perfect theoretical situation. Since mid-level commanders were rare, most undead armies would use the pressure of a high-level undead to force the undead to instinctively charge forward. Basically, the undead would fight for themselves. Yep, this sounded familiar, right? It was the legendary control without any control. A battle would be fought, and if the undead won, there would be a celebration party, but if the undead lost, there would be nothing. Of course, there were also existences that were the complete opposite, such as Omar. Not only was he able to control every single undead, he was even able to obtain power from them. This was something that ordinary undead mages wouldn't be able to understand. Based on my current gold rank mana level, it should have been quite difficult for me to deal with more than 300 modified and specially formed elite undead guards. But surprisingly, I felt full of energy, as if I still had enough spiritual power to control even more undead. In fact, I even felt that it wouldn't be a problem for me to control even more undead. This situation isn't right. Could it be that my bloodline and physical body are buffing my undead magic? But my willpower hasn't changed at all. Perhaps this was the only explanation. I could only come to this conclusion as I looked at my incomplete undead soul imprint. Spiritual power was an additional stat that came with the soul. And on my system's interface, the only stat that was related to the soul was willpower. Willpower was also the stat that changed the least in my many reincarnations. Although it would increase a little every time I reincarnated, it would also decrease a little when I died. It was basically the same. Willpower was an incredibly important stat for Holy Light job class members. Only a sufficiently resilient soul would be able to communicate with the gods, and only then would they be able to withstand more divine power and divine favor without exploding. And for mages, only when fighting against an enemy's illusion magic would a strong soul and strong willpower be of some use. Perhaps a higher willpower could slightly increase the recovery speed of mana overdraft, but no one would overdraft their own mana and mental strength for no reason. Perhaps willpower could allow a necromancer to control more undead at the same time, but the increase was so small that even the necromancer themselves might have overlooked it. System. If I didn't understand, I should have asked. How was I supposed to improve myself if I didn't even understand my own body's condition? Their bloodline is part of the mountain tribe's royalty. From a certain standpoint, they are of the same species as Ale, as well as the same species as the great immemorial devils. As the earliest users of undead magic, they are indeed quite talented in undead magic. Congratulations for discovering your own hidden racial talent, whispers of the great immemorial devils. You have a natural affinity for undead magic, contract magic, and curse magic. You will definitely not be devoured by them. System notification. This is a hidden passive ability of your bloodline. It is impossible to analyze its specific effect. Hidden racial talents won't be notified before they are discovered. After obtaining this body, I didn't have any spare time to research undead magic. I also seemed to have missed the opportunity to research my own bloodline. My Arbiter bloodline can even surpass the Titan Giant. Since it's a double diamond bloodline that far surpasses the dragons and Titan Giants, it definitely contains more secrets than what I've shown so far. It would seem that I've overlooked many things. My job class was going to enter the legend rank, and I needed to repair my other 3 soul imprints. That wouldn't be something that could be done in a short period of time. Perhaps it would be easier to see results if I focused on discovering my own natural talents and potential. After 2 years of growth, this new physical body of mine seemed to have more potential to be discovered. I have nothing to do anyway, Since I still have some mental strength left, why don't I try making something? For example, that frost lich that was created by combining frost magic and necromancer. It just so happens that there are so many test subjects here. Just as I was looking at my new subordinate with ill intentions, a hoarse voice that originated from an undead soul spoke up in my ear. It was the skeleton mage that I had just taken in not long ago. Master, a human gave me a letter and told me to give it to the higher-ups of the undead. Judging from the token he gave me, he should be one of us, undead. A traitor? Before I could even express my astonishment, a familiar figure approached me from behind while holding a camouflage cloth that had cabbages and radishes tied to it. Not far away, behind a nearby rock, several troublemakers that specialized in making people angry were pushing and shoving each other. Go. Aren't you a priest? Hurry up and purify that lich. Purifying undead is a holy light priest's job. I'm a priest of the goddess of wealth, and my job is to make money. How about you go first? Actually, I used to be an excellent adventurer as well, but 3 minutes ago, I took an arrow to the knee. A small magic spell caused the wind to transmit their words to me. Meanwhile, that large fellow that was stealthily continued to slowly and steadily approach me. 1 centimeter, 2 centimeters, 1 centimeter, 2 centimeters. No, look, they're all high-level undead. Since he's able to simultaneously control so many high-level undead, he's definitely no ordinary undead. Perhaps he's a lich. Finally, someone pointed out the crux of the problem. However, this hadn't been a problem from the very start. None of them were newbies, so they naturally recognized their opponent. However, a strong opponent equaled rich rewards. They were simply pushing and shoving and hoping that someone would lead the charge and attract the enemy's firepower. Normally, this would be the job of a holy knight or warrior. However, it was evident that this group was all at the back. I couldn't listen to this any longer, but Betty suddenly exclaimed in surprise. Damn it, where's Audien? Damn it, he's over there. Don't, hurry up and come back. My teammates in the distance did their best to silently convince the impulsive barbarian to come back, so Audien responded in a small voice. Don't worry, this guy's asleep. Alright then, where should I start commenting? Should I start with the barbarian's belief that the undead would actually fall asleep? Or should I start with the barbarian's whispers that shook the entire forest? That deafening subwoofer battle roar shocked even me. However, the most important thing right now was to stop laughing. Otherwise, it would be impossible to stop laughing. Wait a moment, let me recall how I should speak at a time like this. Living, since you dare to enter our territory, have you already prepared to pay the toll? I mean, hand over your own soul? Chapter 330. The internal battle of the wood spirits are so cute, mercenary group ended in just 5 minutes. My undead army now had 4 new, elite modified undead. Don't misunderstand, I didn't kill them, nor was there a need to. I simply told them that I was carrying out a special mission given to me by the wood spirits, and that I was gathering information as an undead mage, and they believed me. Yep, they instantly believed me without any hesitation. They then tried to blackmail me by saying, "You must have a lot of justice points. As a righteous holy knight, you absolutely can't keep your justice points for yourself. Let's all share in the good fortune, and do this mission together." And then, I casually said a few words to them, and they voluntarily joined me. This rotten meat is so disgusting. His entire body was covered in pink pieces of meat. Coupled with my specially prepared makeup techniques, the barbarian Audien had now transformed into a reeking abomination zombie. He had a rotting backbone, stinking rotten meat, and a fat lower body that was so poor that he didn't even wear pants. His intestines were hanging outside, his chin was misconnected, and blood was dripping from the corner of his mouth as he walked. He was the perfect abomination zombie. Actually, according to my job class, I should have disguised myself as an elegant blood tribe member. Under the cover of night, I should have walked on rooftops and in the shadows, using my dagger to harvest the lives of assassins from the thief guild. Elegant? Also, why does this rooftop battle scene sound so familiar? Are you talking about that legendary novel called Assassin? Yep, back in the day, I chose to become a thief precisely because I read that book. He kept nodding, and I felt like I was being scammed more and more. I was hesitating whether or not I should tell him that that novel was also a product of mine back in the day. It was filled with all sorts of logical errors, but since it was so fun, it mysteriously became very popular. If I really followed the main character's lifestyle and became a handsome thief, dying 100 times in a single year would be nothing. But as I looked at his honest smile, I couldn't help but sigh at how tough he was to still be alive. I also felt that it would be better not to ruin his worldview. Yep, I definitely didn't feel like it would be troublesome if he got angry out of embarrassment. Is your dream to become a high-flying burglar? Considering this guy's size and weight, I felt that if he really did jump from roof to roof like a main character in a novel, he wouldn't have to consider how hidden he was, but rather how sturdy the building was. What if, in the middle of the night, a gigantic creature suddenly pierced through the ceiling and fell from the sky with a deafening roar? Yep, I definitely didn't try it, nor did I get stuck in the ceiling. When he thought about this big guy being sandwiched between the ceiling and the floor, he suddenly felt very excited. Perhaps he could let him try it next time. It would be best if he wore a red cotton-padded jacket and a big beard. If he was discovered, he could still. I am Santa Claus. Only good children can receive my gift. What? Is it summer? I'm sorry, I went the wrong way. That damned gnome compass is too unreliable. That stupid unicorn didn't even know to warn me. I actually flew to the wrong hemisphere. Cough, cough, I seem to have gotten distracted again. Let's get back to the main topic. This was my personal collection of a complete, evil-increasing appearance gift pack, which was perfect for powerful warriors. It was cool and practical, and its thick rotting flesh and protruding eyeballs could even increase one's charm towards banshees. Roland, let's have a nice private chat later. I feel like you have some misunderstandings about banshees. Alright then, it seemed that I had accidentally said something bad about banshees in front of the person in question. When I thought about how this former banshee queen was becoming more and more adept at meowing, licking, and meowing, I meant how felines usually pounced, bit, and swept their tails. I really needed to seriously consider how to explain this. Cough, I seem to have gotten distracted again. Let's get back to the main topic. Thanks to my undead skin pack's disguise, the wood spirits are so cute team. Yep, the newly formed wood spirits, mother, love team. No, the newly formed wood spirits are so cute team no longer had any semblance of a living person. The previously mentioned Ajen was wearing an abomination outfit, and the priest Betty was wearing a cape to summon shadows, pretending to be a shadow priest who offered sacrifices to the death god. The handsome elven traveling bard was disguised as an equally handsome blood tribe member, and he even applied some blood-red disguise on himself. The valiant dwarf auntie was still a domineering dwarf auntie. This really couldn't be blamed on my lack of makeup skills. I couldn't think of a more suitable way to disguise a barrel-sized body that weighed over 100 kilograms but was less than 1.4 meters tall as an undead with only rotting flesh and skeletons. If she was also disguised as an abomination, then only an undead mage with an abnormal brain would create such a miniature undead monster. Blood tribe? A true blood tribe member would probably cry for a blood tribe member with such a body. Of course, in the end, I still managed to find a way to disguise her as an overweight ghoul. Although she still had the short and stocky build unique to dwarves, if other undead mages were to see her, they would only think that she was a dwarf who had transformed into a ghoul and that something had gone wrong during the transformation. Of course, the prerequisite was that this auntie was willing to put down her wine barrel. Which corpse ghoul would carry such a large wine barrel on its back? From time to time, it would even secretly scoop up a cup or two to satisfy its cravings. However, I knew that it would be impossible to convince it to put down its luggage. Wasn't there a saying, making a dwarf put down his wine glass is as impossible as making an elf give up their art and pride? What a pity! My skin gift packs are all masterpieces, and they're free products of conscience. These fellows really don't know what's good for them. Sooner or later, I'll find a bad merchant who's good at scamming noobs and scam them. All they need to do is wear a hat and a pair of glasses, along with some random gifts, and sell it as a new skin gift pack. How could they have any conscience? Don't be so calculative. It's already good enough that they're willing to help. Don't be so calculative. Alright then, although this group of scammers didn't seem to be that strong individually, at least I didn't need to divert my attention to control them. They could still be added to my combat strength. Of course, due to certain reasons, I also slightly distanced myself from them. A spy? It's possible for the undead to plant a spy among the living? When I mentioned the information I just received, everyone's astonishment wasn't fake at all. In the minds of ordinary people, and even most adventurers, the undead were a group of wild beasts that were impossible to communicate with. They would actively attack everything before them. How could such an existence possibly plant a spy among the living? Perhaps it should be said that even if they became a spy for these bloodthirsty undead, what could they possibly obtain? Of course, this also meant that most of the adventurers in this adventuring group were still noobs. The Shilua Empire had many spies in the human kingdoms. For nobles who possessed authority and wealth, their greatest enemy was death. Asking them to cultivate and advance in power level to increase their lifespan would be the equivalent of killing them. Undead conversion rituals were probably the easiest way to achieve immortality. Even if they weren't satisfied with an ugly undead body, there were still elegant blood tribe members as an alternative. And if they still wanted to walk under the sun, absorbing other people's life force, blood sacrifices, and other such evil rituals would also satisfy their needs. It wasn't only the corrupt nobles. Veteran adventurers who had lost their future because they were crippled, old people who had been stuck at a bottleneck for more than 10 years, or magical geniuses who were born with darkness or undead elements would all be able to obtain many benefits from the undead. Not only was this true for the Shilua Empire, it was the same for the Yongya Empire back in the day. Every day, the living would come to join the undead of their own volition. There would be powerful individuals who cultivated darkness, curses, and other undead elements. There were also those who were simply dark villains? That sounds really cool. If it was the former, I would happily add them to the cannon fodder faction. If they could prove their own abilities by surviving, I would also make an equivalent exchange with them. If it was the latter, I would also add them to the cannon fodder faction. It was just that they would have to undergo an undead conversion beforehand. Even if they were undead, they would still be undead even if they were transformed into ghouls. At the very least, they would be able to disgust their enemies. Facing the astonishment of these brats, I hesitated for a moment and organized my words before saying, "What can you obtain? It's probably far more than you can imagine. For example, power and an endless lifespan. As long as you're willing to pay a small price, it'll be far faster than cultivating step by step. After all, many times, if you don't care about the consequences, the path of evil will be far faster than the path of righteousness." I didn't say anything else as I looked at everyone's contemplative expressions. Reality would always be cruel. Rather than blindly believing that all other adventurers were your companions, it would be better to save on this tuition fee and make necessary preparations beforehand. Soon, I received the information I was hoping for from my new servant, the skeleton mage Cougar. A short cloaked individual with a dark green snake-shaped dagger. He has an aura of darkness? His left leg is slightly lame, and he seems to be injured? I looked towards my teammates inquisitively. After all, compared to me who had just arrived here, they should be far more familiar with the adventurers here. Some of them then looked up at the sky, while others checked their weapons. However, not a single one of them replied. It was obvious that these people were unreliable. Or, perhaps they had no interest in other adventurers at all, nor did they try to collect information on other adventurers. I could only helplessly shake my head as I accepted the letter that Cougar handed me. From a certain standpoint, this was quite ironic. The undead had placed a spy among the living, but had mistakenly given important information to the spy the living had placed among the undead. The yellow envelope was quite light. It seemed like an ordinary letter had been sealed with red beeswax. It seemed that it could be opened with a single tear. However, judging from the faint magical waves coming from the envelope, there was also a common little mechanism hidden within. If the recipient didn't know the normal way to open the envelope and casually opened it, the envelope would self-destruct. The person who had set up this little mechanism would also know about it. However, such a little mechanism was meaningless to me. I lightly tapped on the envelope, and a small piece of ice sealed the envelope. The absolute zero ice, which would bring eternal slumber, sent this mechanism into eternal slumber as well. When I tore open the envelope, I saw that the letter was nothing but a boring digital account book. It seemed that this was a common digital password that would only require deciphering against various secret code books. Although it would be possible to decipher it if I spent some time, and I had faintly learned how to decipher it, but I recall that you've never even passed your secret code deciphering and basic mathematics. That's right. Even back in the day at the Cloud Tower, I couldn't escape from annoying numbers, engineering, elemental magic, and spell model construction. But what did you mean by basic mathematics? You actually had calculus and solid geometry as your basic mathematics? Didn't you know that I chose law in my previous life precisely because I didn't want to study those annoying advanced mathematics subjects? As a liberal arts student, I hate math so much, and I hate it even more that there's advanced mathematics in another world. However, as a delinquent student who was constantly on the brink of passing or failing every subject, I had actually achieved the dreams of many similar students. Teacher Harlois, it's all up to you. I can only count on you. You only think of me at a time like this. That's right. Although I failed my basic mathematics subjects, I always had an old grandpa or granny, cat pouncing in protest. Teacher with me! The wood spirits are planning to expand the Forest of Dreams territory. It's expected to begin on the second Sunday of May, which is 3 days after the letter was sent. Harlois was becoming more and more skilled at translating. It was evident that she had already figured out the pattern of the secret code. However, the more I listened, the colder my heart became. Harlois knew quite a high level of secret information. It was evident that there was at least a spy among the higher-ups of the adventurers. But it was precisely because of this grim reality that I faintly had an idea. Perhaps I could even beat them at their own game,